Once upon a time, in a quiet little town, there was a man named Charlie who loved art more than anything else. He spent hours wandering through galleries, admiring the colors and stories captured on canvas. One day, Charlie heard whispers about a collection of paintings that had been lost for many years. They were said to be hauntingly beautiful, but also cursed. Intrigued, Charlie set out to find these mysterious artworks, unaware that they would change his life forever. As he searched, he found an old gallery hidden at the end of a narrow street. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with paintings that seemed to watch him. Among them, Charlie discovered the lost collection. The colors were vibrant, and the images were mesmerizing, but there was something unsettling about them. The moment he brought them home, strange things began to happen. At night, when the house was quiet, Charlie would hear soft whispers that seemed to come from the paintings. They were faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They seemed to call out to him, begging him to listen. Charlie tried to ignore them, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The more he looked at the paintings, the more he felt a strange pull toward them. It was as if they were alive, filled with secrets that wanted to be revealed. He began to lose sleep, haunted by the whispers that echoed in his mind. Friends and family noticed the change in him. He became distant, his eyes sunken, and his laughter faded. They urged him to get rid of the paintings, but Charlie couldn't bring himself to do it. He was drawn to them, even as they drove him closer to madness. One evening, as he stood in front of the largest painting, he felt a chill in the air. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a storm. He could almost make out words, but they were too faint to understand. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. Charlie's heart raced as he fumbled for a candle. When he finally lit it, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The painting had changed. The once serene landscape now appeared twisted and dark, with shadows creeping across the canvas. And in the center, a pair of eyes stared back at him, filled with sorrow and rage. Charlie stumbled back, his breath quickening. The whispers turned into cries, echoing in his ears. He felt as though he was losing his grip on reality. Determined to rid himself of the torment, Charlie decided to sell the paintings. He contacted a gallery owner who had once admired his collection. But when the owner arrived, he could sense the darkness that surrounded the paintings. He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, as if he could feel the whispers lingering in the air. Despite Charlie's insistence, the owner left, shaken and pale. Desperate, Charlie turned to the internet, hoping to find someone willing to buy the cursed collection. He posted pictures and descriptions, but every inquiry felt wrong. Each potential buyer seemed to hear the whispers too, their faces twisting in fear as they backed away. It was as if the paintings were protecting themselves, refusing to leave his side. Days turned into weeks, and Charlie became a shell of his former self. He stopped eating and sleeping, consumed by the madness that the paintings brought. The whispers grew louder, and he began to see shadows moving in the corners of his vision. He knew he had to do something before it was too late. One night, in a fit of desperation, Charlie decided to confront the paintings. He gathered all his courage and stood before them, demanding to know what they wanted. The room grew cold, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices, each one pleading, screaming, and crying out. It was overwhelming, and Charlie felt as though he was drowning in their sorrow. As he listened, he began to piece together their story. The paintings were created by an artist who had poured his soul into each brushstroke. But something terrible had happened to him, something that trapped his spirit within the canvas. The whispers were the cries of the artist, begging for release. With this realization, Charlie understood that the madness he experienced was not just his own. It was the artist's pain seeping through. Fueled by a mix of fear and empathy, Charlie knew he had to help the trapped spirit. He spent nights researching ways to break the curse, poring over old texts and folklore. He discovered that the only way to free the artist was to recreate the final painting he had never completed. It was a daunting task, but Charlie felt a sense of purpose for the first time in weeks. He set up his easel in front of the largest painting, determined to channel the artist's spirit. As he painted, the whispers grew softer, guiding his hand. He felt the emotions pouring out of him, the sadness and longing that had been locked away for so long. The room filled with a strange energy, and for a moment, he felt a connection to the artist that transcended time and space. But as he worked, the shadows in the room began to shift. They twisted and turned, growing darker and more menacing. Charlie's heart raced as he realized that the paintings were not just haunted, they were angry. The whispers turned into shouts, and the air grew thick with tension. He could feel the spirit fighting against him, trying to reclaim its hold. With every stroke of the brush, Charlie felt the struggle intensify. He was no longer just painting, he was battling for his life. The shadows lunged at him, and he stumbled back, knocking over his palette. The colors spilled across the floor, mixing together in a chaotic swirl. In that moment, he understood that the artist's pain was intertwined with his own, and he had to face it head-on. He grabbed his brush, determined to finish the painting no matter the cost. As he painted, the whispers transformed into a single voice, pleading with him to set it free. Charlie poured all his fear, sorrow, and hope into the canvas, channeling the artist's spirit with every stroke. The shadows roared around him, but he pressed on, knowing that this was his only chance. Finally, with one last stroke, he completed the painting. The room fell silent, and the shadows receded. Charlie collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. He looked at the painting, and for the first time it was no longer twisted and dark. It was a beautiful landscape, vibrant and alive, filled with light and hope. As he caught his breath, Charlie felt a warmth enveloping him. The whispers faded into a soft sigh, and he knew that the artist had finally been set free. He had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the experience had changed him forever. The paintings that had once tormented him now felt like a part of his soul, a reminder of the power of art and the importance of listening to the whispers within. With a newfound appreciation for the beauty and pain of creation, Charlie decided to share the story of the lost paintings. He opened his own gallery, filling it with art that told stories of struggle, redemption, and hope. The whispers had guided him through the darkness, and now he wanted to help others find their light. As the years went by, Charlie became known as a great art collector and curator. He often spoke of the haunted paintings that had changed his life, encouraging others to embrace their own creativity. The whispers may have once brought madness, but they also brought clarity and purpose. And in the end, that was the true power of art. So, if you ever find yourself in a quiet little town and you hear whispers in the wind, remember Charlie's story. The voices may not always be what they seem, and sometimes they are just waiting for someone to listen. It was a chilly autumn evening when Charlie first felt the change in the atmosphere of his gallery. The air grew heavy, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to lengthen and stretch, whispering secrets only they could understand. It was as if the paintings were aware of his every move, watching with sinister intent. Each canvas had its own spirit, and some were not content to be just works of art. They were hungry for something more, something dark. One night, while he was closing up, a cold breeze swept through the gallery, rattling the doors and sending chills down his spine. Charlie brushed it off, thinking it was just an old building settling. But then the lights began to flicker, flashing erratically as if something was trying to overwhelm the electricity itself. Shadows darted in his peripheral vision, teasing him, drawing him deeper into the unsettling atmosphere. With every flicker, Charlie felt the whispers return, rising from the depths of the paintings like ghosts clawing their way to the surface. He was alone, or so he thought. Suddenly, from the depths of the gallery, a low, guttural moan echoed through the halls, chilling him to the bone. He hesitated, heart pounding, but curiosity tugged at him, urging him to explore the darkness. When he reached the largest painting, the one that had haunted his dreams, he gasped. The landscape was alive, the colors swirling as if the scene were a storm trapped in a glass frame. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, painted with an almost tangible rage. The trees bent and twisted, their branches clawing at the air as though yearning for freedom. He stepped closer, entranced as the whispers morphed into frantic cries. A face began to emerge in the center of the painting, one filled with anguish and despair, a face that looked hauntingly familiar. It was the artist frozen in a moment of torment. The more Charlie stared, the more he felt himself pulled into the canvas, as though it were a doorway to another world. Then, without warning, the painting erupted in a flash of light, enveloping Charlie completely. The joy he felt turned to terror as he found himself standing within the painting, surrounded by the fury of nature unleashed. Wind howled around him, drowning out his screams. In this nightmarish landscape, darkness swirled, and from within it, figures began to emerge. Twisted forms with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, grotesque expressions frozen in silent screams. Terrified, Charlie tried to run, but the ground beneath his feet felt alive, pulling him down. Every direction he turned revealed more creatures, shadows that flickered and danced, their mouths stretched into impossible grins. He could hear them whispering to him, their voices like nails scraping across metal, urging him to join them in their anguish. As he stumbled, he fell into a pit where forgotten memories seemed to fester. The whispers grew louder, snatching at his sanity as faces of anguish swirled around him. Each face had a story, a life cut short, a soul snatched away, all trapped within the paintings he had sought to understand. They clawed at Charlie, pulling him deeper into their despair as he fought to escape the endless cycle of torment. Realizing he could not stay, Charlie summoned every ounce of strength and lunged toward the glimmer of light he saw in the distance. It flickered like a dying star, promising safety, but he was not alone. Creatures rose from the darkness, their eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. They reached for him, grasping at the fabric of his reality, dragging him back into the void. Just as they were about to pull him into their world of chaos, he broke through the light, tumbling back into the gallery, gasping for breath. The room was eerily silent, the paintings quietly watching him, their colors muted. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was as if they had fed on his fear and pain, tasting the depths of his torment. Charlie sank to the floor, heart racing, feeling an emptiness settle deep in his gut. Days went by, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness inside the paintings had awakened something within him. He found himself talking to the artworks more than ever, the whispers now a constant presence in his mind. They drew him into their stories, asking him to paint what they could not. One stormy night, as rain lashed against the windows, Charlie stood before the paintings, pensively studying each one. It was then that he felt a shift in the air, a pulse of energy that coursed through the room, steady and relentless. The gallery hummed, and he could hear the whispers urging him to begin anew, to give voice to their suffering. He picked up his brush, the wood warm against his palm, and began painting. Each stroke felt like it was alive. Shadows danced beneath the surface of the canvas as if they were trying to escape. He felt strange, as if he were under their spell, fueled by a desperate need to set the trapped souls free. But as he continued to paint, those familiar, haunting faces began to emerge. Faces of those who were lost, faces twisted with sorrow. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and a heavy weight settled over him. Charlie looked up and gasped. The distorted figures in his paintings had begun to move, stretching beyond the canvas. They slithered out, their forms shifting and writhing, merging with the shadows around the edges of the room. The gallery transformed into a nightmare as chaos blossomed, the reality of a waking dream unraveling around him. He stumbled backward, horror-stricken as the paintings flooded the room, merging with the darkness. They drew nearer, whispering with an urgent intensity, begging and pleading for recognition, for understanding. Voices swirled around him, each one more desperate than the last. Charlie was losing control, losing himself in the cacophony of pain. Fighting to regain his composure, Charlie closed his eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sound. He had to focus, He had to finish his mission. He felt the brush trembling in his grip, the paint refusing to obey, as if the spirits within wanted to fight him at every turn. He grasped it tightly, forcing himself to reopen his eyes. Before him, the overwhelming swarm of whispers became silenced, and the room brightened for a fleeting moment. It felt as if he had shared a fleeting connection with the trapped souls. He poured every ounce of grief he had into each stroke. Slowly, he began to see the artist emerge from within his painting. The colors burst forth, illuminating the darkness, and for a moment, the chaos stilled. But just as hope began to glimmer, the shadows coiled around him. The faces twisted into grotesque expressions of rage, their whispers now transforming into screams, demanding he acknowledge their suffering. The room trembled violently, filled with a deafening roar as the figures surged forward, drowning him in their misery. Charlie felt the brush slip from his fingers as he was enveloped by the chaos, pulled back into the darkness of despair. He fell, unable to escape the grip of the shadows. They dragged him under, and just when he thought he couldn't fight any longer, he remembered the warmth of the artist's spirit urging him on. With a surge of determination, he fought against the darkness, determined to finish his calling, even in the face of fear. The truth was there, lurking at the edge of his consciousness. He had to break through the pain and fulfill his purpose, to free the art, not just from the curse, but from the cycle of anguish that had haunted it since its creation. In that moment, he understood that the answers he sought were intertwined with the suffering of these lost souls. He summoned all the courage he had left, and with a fierce shout, he declared, "I will not be defeated. I will tell your stories." In that moment, something shifted. The shadows paused, their ominous forms wavering. Charlie reached out, his hands trembling as he grasped the palette and began to mix colors anew. With a fervor born of desperation, he painted a scene of hope, a vision of light breaking through the darkness. Each brushstroke infused the room with warmth, courage, and resolution. The figures twisted and howled around him, but Charlie pressed on. He could feel the struggle within him, the spirit of the artist merging with his own. Shadows wrapped around him, threatening to drag him into the abyss. But he held firm, letting the voice of the artist pour through his every stroke. The gallery erupted into chaos once more, but this time it felt different. The shadows shifted, moving toward the light he was creating, drawn in like moths to a flame. As colors clashed and collided on the canvas, the faces that once screamed in agony began to soften, their expressions transforming into misty outlines of hope. It was in this moment that the gallery became a battleground between light and dark. The paintings raged against him, but Charlie refused to relent. He poured his soul into the canvas, the colors blurring and blending, creating waves of emotion. The shadows grew quieter, their anger lessened, as if they were beginning to listen. As he painted furiously, the whispers began to harmonize. They transformed from frantic cries into soft pleas, urging him with a sense of urgency, guiding him towards the truth that was buried deep within the fabric of the artwork. Each stroke of his brush became a lifeline, pulling the trapped spirits back into the world of light and understanding. But Charlie was not just fighting for their release. He was fighting for his own soul. With every stroke, he felt himself breaking free from the chains of despair that had clung to him so tightly. The darkness, once suffocating, now felt like a ghost of the past, slipping away as he embraced the power of creation. Yet, just when it seemed that victory was at hand, the shadows surged again, stronger than before, trying to reclaim everything he had fought for. The shadows twisted into monstrous shapes, looming near, their intentions suddenly clear. They began to close in on him, feeding off the fear, attempting to drag him back into the chaos. With all his strength, Charlie took a step back, his heart racing. The energy pulsating through the room became both terrifying and exhilarating. He called upon every ounce of resolve, pushing against the tide of darkness. He had to finish what he started, had to paint the light that would dispel the shadows for good. He felt the brush of despair close in, but he also felt the warmth of the artist. In that moment of clarity, Charlie let go of his fear and embraced the pain around him. He began to paint not just for himself, but for the artist and all those lost within the bounds of the cursed collection. The crescendo built as the gallery vibrated with emotion, the colors exploding from his brush onto the canvas. With each declaration of defiance against the darkness, the oppressive weight began to lift. The shadows writhed and twisted, pulling back as the light expanded, pushing away the filth of despair that had once held sway over the gallery and its cursed inhabitants. Charlie painted even harder, pouring every emotion. He was not just fighting shadows, but reclaiming stories long forgotten. Each face on the canvas began to transform, their expressions shifting from despair to hope, as though they had finally found peace. But then, amidst that brightness, a shape emerged, dark and towering, its eyes glowing with malice. Charlie recognized it as the darkest shadow of them all, the embodiment of every fear that had ever tormented him. It surged forward, intent on snatching him back into the void, and for a moment, Charlie faltered. Fear nearly paralyzed him, but he took a deep breath, remembering the warmth of freedom he had painted for the artist. Drawing upon that energy, he shouted against the darkness, "You will not take me. I am free, and I will free them." The shadow hesitated, caught off guard by the fierce declaration. In that heartbeat of doubt, Charlie seized the moment. He flung more color onto the canvas, unleashing a wave of brilliance that surged forth, flooding the gallery with light. Bright hues cascaded, washing away the darkness that had loomed so long. The shadows shrieked, retreating and unraveling in the blinding glow. Charlie felt the grip of fear start to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unity between the souls and himself. Hope surged in his heart as the last screams of the trapped shadows faded into whispers of gratitude. In the aftermath, as the gallery glimmered with renewed life, Charlie stood amidst the remnants of fear and despair, transformed by the journey he had undertaken. The paintings around him gleamed with a new vigor, their subjects bright and alive, free from the chains of darkness. He breathed a sigh of relief, knowing he had not only liberated them, but had also discovered himself in the process. Yet even in the tranquility that settled over the gallery, he felt a lingering presence. He turned slowly, looking over his shoulder, sensing the shadows that still lurked in the outskirts. It was a reminder of the struggle he had faced, an echo of the darkness that once claimed that cursed collection. With resolve, he stepped forward, determined to ensure that the gallery would remain a sanctuary for the lost souls and a beacon of hope for others. He felt a duty now, a calling to protect this space, knowing that while darkness could be held at bay, it would always exist, waiting for the moment of vulnerability to slip back in. As he began to rearrange the gallery, preparing for the next exhibit, something moved in the corner of the room, drawing his gaze. A flicker of movement caught his attention. A shadow, deeper than the rest, slithered across the floor and vanished behind a large canvas hanging crooked on the wall. His heart raced, and he hesitated. The air grew still, thickening with an uneasy silence, like the moment before a thunderstorm. It was as though the gallery itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. Charlie approached the painting cautiously. The figures within seemed to stare back at him, eyes glinting with unspoken truths. He reached out, the surface cold beneath his fingers, and in that instant he felt it, a pulse faint but real, throbbing like a heartbeat. The sensation sent chills crawling up his spine. Just as he was about to pull away, the shadow returned, creeping along the edge of his vision. This time, it coiled around his legs, tight and unyielding. Panic surged through him as he tried to shake it off, but it felt like it was becoming a part of him. With a sudden jolt, the shadow uncoiled, slamming him backward against the wall. An unsettling laugh echoed in the stillness, a sound filled with malice and mockery that made Charlie's breath hitch in his throat. "Did you think you could escape?" It taunted, the voice serpentined, slithering through the gallery like poison. Shadows flickered alive, forming grotesque shapes and reaching toward him. as if desperate to reclaim the freedom he had wrested away. Charlie felt the walls closing in, the darkness swelling around him, an expansive void ready to swallow him whole. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the gallery, extinguishing the soft lights that had illuminated the workspace, leaving him in thick, impenetrable darkness. Heart pounding, Charlie fumbled for his phone, the dim glow of the screen revealing the eerie blankness around him. As he shone the light around, the paintings loomed like monstrous sentinels, their colors distorted, faces twisted and contorted in anguish. The air turned thick with despair, pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Then he noticed a whispering, quiet yet insistent, crawling out from the walls. "Help us! Help us!" The voices echoed through the room, layered and overlapping, tugging at the very strings of his soul. They grew louder, dissonant, a cacophony that resonated within him. In his mind's eye, he could see their twisted expressions, mouths moving, begging for salvation while trapped in the painted void. "Please, don't ignore us," the whispers demanded, haunting in their clarity, curling around him like a creeping vine. They weren't just lost souls anymore. They were a collective grief, and their sorrow now held him captive. Charlie's resolve wavered, the fear crawling through him. But somewhere deep inside, he knew he had to confront this darkness once and for all. Mustering his courage, he turned his phone back towards the canvas that had attracted his gaze initially. This time, when the light touched its surface, something shifted. The painted figures writhed, colors swirling like smoke, as if they were awakening from a long slumber. The beautiful scene he had painted transformed into a nightmare flash, the bright colors fading into grays and blacks. Faces pressed against the surface, their mouths moving in silent screams, pushing against the paint as if trying to break free. Desperation etched into their features sent a jolt of fear through Charlie, and he stumbled back, realizing that the figures were not just trapped. They were angry, lamenting their forgotten stories, and they desired him to remember. The shadow loomed larger now, gliding along the walls, inching closer, fueled by the unrest swirling like a tempest. It twisted into monolithic shapes, towering above him, the weight of its darkness almost suffocating. Chaotic whispers surged, doling out accusations, reminding him of the times he had neglected their pain, their existence, and the stories they had yet to tell. The pulse of the gallery quickened, matching the beat of his heart. "I didn't forget," he whispered, feeling small, voice swallowed by the encroaching despair. "I fought for you." But the words felt shallow, lost amidst the growing tumult. The shadows thickened, surrounding him, tightening their stark grip until he was enveloped in a cold, dark fog that pressed against him from all angles. Fear turned into a violent shudder as he realized he could no longer see beyond the walls of darkness closing in around him. Panic ignited, and he squeezed his eyes shut, trying to find the light he had painted. But it was gone, replaced by the sound of hollow laughter echoing around him. The shadows chuckled, each sound dripping with malice, taunting him with memories of every fearful moment he had ever experienced. "Are you ready to join us?" they hissed. And with that, Charlie felt himself being pulled toward the very canvas he had tried to escape. It clung to him like a predator ensnaring its prey, the colors swirling and shifting into a vortex of despair. As he stumbled forward, he grasped the edge of a nearby easel, trying to steady himself, but the force was too strong. With a desperate shout, he lunged for the light of his phone, casting it toward the paintings swirling around him. It illuminated a face that twisted in rage, another lost soul who realized his fate mirrored theirs. The figure lifted its hand, fingers stretching toward him. "You can't escape," it snarled. The moment its gaze locked onto his, the darkness surged, and he felt their collective pain seeping into him, clawing at his mind. The shadows grew wild, feverish in their pursuit, seeking to snuff out any remaining spark of courage that flickered within him. Its laughter echoed, deep and haunting. "You belong here. You set us free, but at what cost? You will join the rest of us, forever trapped within the confines of your own nightmares. But just then, a voice broke through the din, faint yet familiar. It was soft, reassuring, echoing from the very depths of chaos. "Charlie, remember who you are. You are the artist." The whisper ignited a flame of memory within him. The joy he felt when painting, the connection of creating, the moments that filled him with life rather than fear. He opened his eyes, breathing deeply, clinging to that glimmer and preparing to fight back. "I am not your prisoner," he shouted, digging deep within himself to find that spark. He reached for the palette at his side, determined to reclaim his power. As he started to paint upon the air itself, each stroke became light. Colors shimmered into being, pushing back the encroaching darkness, radiating warmth. "Let their stories live," Charlie cried, channeling every ounce of his will into each stroke. The shadows recoiled, shrieking in fury as the light exploded outward, illuminating every corner of the gallery. The paint glistened, revealing glimpses of the lost lives, their faces merging into something beautiful, transformed by the power of truth and recognition. As the shadows shrank under the onslaught of his creation, Charlie felt strength surging through him, bolstered by the spirits he fought to free. "You will not take me," he declared, voice rising above the storm. "Your darkness has no power here." With a final flourish, he merged colors together, creating a portal of light that flickered and crackled with energy, pulling the forgotten souls forward, capturing their pain, and channeling it into something new. The shadow, while once overwhelming, began to wither as it was consumed by the brilliance emanating from his work. More figures began to emerge from the edges, stepping into the light as torment faded from their forms. Their eyes reflected gratitude, their smiles whispering to him of the life they would reclaim. Charlie felt his heart swell, pushing the fear deep within him back again. Just as he thought he'd won, a tremor rippled through the ground beneath him. With a crack, the floor shattered, revealing a chasm of darkness waiting to swallow everything whole, a void tainted with every lost hope. The air shimmered as that malevolent shadow surged, fighting back, desperate to reclaim its territory. "You dare challenge me?" it screeched, rage coloring the voice, 1,000 whispers combining into one furious scream. Charlie's breath caught in his throat as the darkness curled and reared, more enormous than before, raw power coursing through it, seeking to consume his very essence. He had awakened a force that wouldn't easily relent. The gallery trembled, paintings gasped, and for a heartbeat, fear washed over him once more like a flood. But the warmth of the souls he had freed wrapped around him like a shield. They were there, surrounding him, infusing him with strength, aiming to protect him from the abyss. Charlie steadied himself, the light bursting forth in blinding intensity, illuminating the darkness, threads of fear dissolving as he stood firm. His voice now echoed through the chaos, cutting through the shrieks of rage. "You will not take me, and you will not take them. We are free. We will tell our stories." The shadow shook violently, but began to dissipate, unraveling like smoke in the wind. Daylight broke through, flooding the room, pushing back the encroaching darkness, revealing the grim remains of the struggle. Every paint splatter, every brushstroke echoed the depths of loss and despair. But now they were woven into a tapestry of hope. Just when it seemed like the battle was won, a chilling laughter echoed once more, a sound that carried on the stillness after the storm. "You think you've won? You think you can escape your fate?" The voice, now a mere whisper, echoed like an omen, promising that the shadows never truly leave. As the lights flickered back on, the gallery appeared serene, a haunting beauty filling the air. Yet, somewhere deep within him, Charlie felt a pulse, a reminder. The shadows may have retreated for now, but the battle was far from over. The gallery, once a sanctuary, still simmered. He glanced at the paintings, their colors vibrant, yet he sensed a lurking presence behind the brushstrokes, a warning. The stories would continue, not just in their newfound hope, but in the echo of despair and anger that had birthed them. Charlie took a deep breath, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. As he turned to leave, the paintings held his gaze, an uneasy familiarity settling in his gut. He was not just the artist. He was the bridge between worlds, and somewhere lurking in the shadows, the darkness awaited its chance, a chance to reclaim what it had once lost. And he had a feeling this was merely a prelude to a much darker tale yet to unfold. The gallery would reveal its true nature, its secrets open to the brave, yet daring enough to seek them out. But Charlie knew now that he would fight, for art brought forth not only beauty but truth, and it was the truth that would keep the shadows at bay. As Charlie stepped into the chilling stillness of the gallery, the flickering lights cast long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist as if alive. He felt a shiver run down his spine, a premonition thrumming through the air like a plucked string. The walls loomed, painted with unsettling figures, their eyes glinting with a knowing that echoed from beyond the canvas. He paused, glancing back at the paintings. A deeper darkness crept into the corners, like ink spreading through water, pooling at the base of the walls. As the shadows thickened, it felt as if the air itself was clutching at him, squeezing out his breath. A sudden noise shattered the silence, the faint sound of scratching, nails on wood, or perhaps something far worse. Charlie's heart raced. It originated from behind one of the frames, a haunting rhythm that matched the thudding of his pulse. He slowly approached, drawn by an irresistible curiosity mixed with fear. The scratching grew more frantic, thrumming through the quiet. A chill shot through him as he reached for the frame, his fingertips brushing the cold edge. The scratching stopped abruptly, silence crashing down like a weight, sending a pang of dread through him. In the quiet, he could hear a whisper rumbling through the walls, fragments of desperate voices layered over each other. "Help us! Let us out!" The sound echoed in his mind, twisting the panic within him. He recoiled, pulling back as the voices grew louder, overlapping until they became a cacophony of despair. Just as he turned to flee, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Behind the frame, shapes began to materialize, shrouded in darkness. Leaning closer, he couldn't make out their features. Fingers pressed against the glass, faces contorted in agony. "Save us," they pleaded, desperation lacing their words. "You can hear us, we're trapped." Charlie stumbled backward, this time feeling the cold sweat slip down his back. He spun around, intent on escaping the gallery, but the once familiar space felt alien, warped by the darkness that now curled around every corner. The door was gone, replaced by a blocked wall splattered with dark paint, twisting like grotesque creatures caught in an endless struggle. A thick fog began to creep in from the edges of the room, swirling around his feet like a living shadow, pulling at him. The voices morphed, shifting into agonized wails that filled his chest with cold fear. "Charlie," they cried, yearning with a grief that twisted into something more sinister. "You wanted our stories. Now you must live them." Suddenly, the lights flickered wildly. With each pulse, shadows darted across the floor, larger than before, crawling and weaving in frantic patterns. Charlie felt his heart race as a figure emerged from the depths, a dark silhouette outlined by the dim light. It was tall, looming over him, a monstrous shape that seemed to pull the shadows into its form. The face that emerged was unrecognizable, just a mass of shadows, but the eyes were the deepest black, reflecting back his own terror. The creature's mouth stretched into a sinister grin, jagged and impossibly wide, as if it could swallow whole the very essence of light. "Welcome, artist," it hissed, voice rasping like dry leaves. "You wish to give voice to the lost, yet you found yourself among them." The air chilled instantly, and Charlie's breath turned in a fog before him. Panic set in as he backed away, but the shadows surged forward, coiling around his ankles, anchoring him in place. "You will paint for us," the creature continued, its eyes glinting with malice. "You will paint until you understand the depth of our pain." Just then, one of the figures pressed its palm against the glass, the face distorted in anguish, as Charlie felt his mind begin to unravel. Memories he thought long buried flared to life, moments of loss and sorrow flooding in, making him ache. He was consumed by visions of the stories he had turned a blind eye to. The vulnerability of those trapped within their own grievances, their shadows swirling in pain. "You cannot escape the truth, Charlie," they whispered. "This is your penance." With each breath, the weight of their stories bore down upon him, the fog thickening until he could barely see. He felt the ground pulling beneath his feet, and the shadows began to solidify. The scent of decay filled the air, mingling with the tang of fear, and he could hear the heartbeat of the gallery thrumming, like a wounded creature. As the walls closed in, he realized he was trapped in a canvas of his own making. Despair flooded him, and for a moment, he saw it clearly. The swirling darkness was alive, feeding off the pain and suffering, thriving in the stories of the forgotten. Desperately searching for a way out, Charlie began to call for help, but the voices turned vicious, stifling his cries. "Help!" they mocked, their laughter echoing mockingly in the suffocating space. "You are the help we need, artist. You will endure what we have lived." With a final surge, he willed himself to break free from the grasp of shadows, lunging toward a newly emerged door at the back of the gallery. The familiar wooden frame shone under the dim lights, almost inviting. But as he reached for the handle, a sharp pain shot through his hand, and he looked down to see blood pooling from a jagged cut where the doorframe had splintered, biting at him with each desperate pull. "I will not be your puppet," he shouted into the darkness, pain mingling with fury. But the echoes of the lost soul sang in reply, wrapping around him, dulcet yet sharp, constraining. His resolve, "You will join us forever." As he turned back toward the figures, the mood shifted, their faces now twisted into a macabre semblance of joy. They rose from the frames, stepping into the light, skin pale and stretched tight over their bones, each movement inked with the agony of 1,000 unvoiced stories. Charlie felt weaker, the shadows' laughter wrapping around him like a noose. "Join us, Charlie. The darkness is where we thrive." Suddenly, instead of lauding him, they closed in, a cloud of desolation that shrank the light around him, overwhelming in its intent to possess him. The gallery pulsed, growing wilder, entrapping him in a storm that swirled with sorrow and dread as he fought against their pull. Just as he thought he could withstand the mounting despair, a cacophony of screams erupted, a sound so penetrating it shattered his thoughts. It was not just the souls of the lost, but something else lurking beyond, the darkness itself, spilling out from every shadow. It clawed at the edges of his mind, tugging at the very fiber of his being. "Your brush will paint our story," it hissed, a guttural growl reverberating in the air. "Your pain will be immortalized here, in this gallery of horrors." In a final act of defiance, Charlie gripped the nearest brush, dipped it into the thick, dark paint that lay beneath the easel, and hurled it at the approaching shadow. The moment it struck, the gallery exploded in a cacophony of color, and the darkness recoiled, momentarily stunned. But he knew that this was a temporary reprieve. The shadows would regroup, they always did. As the echoes of their cries lingered in the air, he understood then that he could never fully escape the gallery's hold. It would always seek him out, just as he sought the stories of the lost. And somewhere, in the dark recesses of the gallery, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a glint of something sharp, perhaps hope, or perhaps a harbinger of the darkness that waited patiently for its next chance to ensnare him in its web of despair. As he fought to reclaim his breath, Charlie felt the weight of destiny hanging heavy in the air. He was both the artist and the story, the savior and the damned. As the thick weight of silence descended once more, he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The darkness could not be vanquished so easily, and the gallery whispered promises of trials yet to come, its shadows dancing in anticipation of his fate. A low groan reverberated through the gallery, vibrating the air around Charlie. It sounded like a massive beast shifting in its sleep, awakening from a long slumber. The walls seemed to breathe in time with the noise, expanding and contracting as if alive. Shadows flickered at the corners of his vision, darting back and forth in the dim light. Their movements were almost playful, but he sensed a predatory hunger behind them, waiting for the right moment to pounce. With each heartbeat, the gallery warped further, distorting into an absurd maze of twisted perspectives. The paint on the walls dripped in slow, viscous rivulets, pooling at his feet. It shimmered with a sinister luminescence, captivating yet dreadful, like a dark ocean inviting him to plunge into its depths. Charlie's senses heightened. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the air felt amplified, pounding against his skull with a heavy rhythm. Suddenly, a painting caught his eye. It was unlike the others, fresh brushstrokes still glistening as if it had just been created. It depicted a figure in a distorted landscape, elongated limbs stretched to impossible lengths, eyes wide and vacant, a silent scream frozen on its lips. Charlie was drawn closer, entranced yet fearful. The figure seemed to shift within the confines of the frame, a magnetic pull that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. It felt like it was watching him, its gaze boring into him from across the canvas. "Help me," a raspy whisper floated from the painting, making his breath hitch. He stumbled back, disbelief wrapping around him like a shroud. "You're not real," he muttered, unconvinced but rooted in place. He shook his head, trying to dispel the illusion, but the depths of its eyes grew darker, the shapes clawing at the edges further revealing their forms. The shadows that clung to them seeped out of the frame, tendrils reaching and grasping, skimming across the wooden floor towards him. As he turned to run, the air thickened, a tangible weight pressing upon his chest. Each step felt laborious. An unseen force resisted him, dragging him back into the darkness. Outside the gallery, he remembered the world bathed in daylight, filled with laughter and life. Yet here, every sound felt suffocated, stifled under the weight of the night pressing in from all sides. And then the whispers returned, lower this time, wrapping around him like a cold breath. "You must paint, you must listen." It was a chorus of desperate voices layered with anguish, each a thread of pain dragging Charlie deeper into the abyss. The shadows danced frantically, now coiling up his limbs, a grotesque embrace that threatened to crush him under their despair. Their laughter filled his ears, mocking his struggle. "Join us," they chanted, their words echoing in his mind. "Become one with our tales, our suffering. You'll create art as you've never imagined." In a surge of defiance, Charlie wrested his arm free, grasping the paintbrush with renewed resolve. He flung it toward the black paint that oozed from the walls. It struck the surface, and like a detonated bomb, a wave of darkness exploded outward. The gallery shook, the lights flickering erratically, illuminating fleeting images of tormented souls. A never-ending parade of despair tore through the chaos. He glimpsed faces contorted in pain, reaching out with skeletal fingers, desperate for release. Each figure bore a story written in their hollow eyes, a history that spiraled into anguish with every blink. The atmosphere thickened, reeking of sorrow, a miasma that coiled in his lungs, suffocating and numbing. Charlie stumbled, desperately trying to hold on to his sanity, feeling the demented world closing off his escape. The shadows surged again toward him, driven by an instinct as ancient as fear itself. They clawed at the edges of his mind, suffusing him with remnants of their tortured pasts. Memories of loss and heartbreak layered over his own. He could feel their struggles echoing through his soul, resonating within him like a cruel symphony of torment. Each story, a thread pulling him closer to the edge of madness. In an act of desperation, he sprinted toward what appeared to be the gallery's exit, a flickering light beckoning him forward. But as he drew near, it morphed into another painting, an unending series of canvases that seemed to warp and stretch. At the center of each was a single eye, wide and accusatory, glaring at him as if it alone held the truth of his fate. The air felt electric, and he could hear the faint hum of the shadows, a low, vibrating chorus that quickened, syncopating with the pounding of his heart. "Stay with us," They breathed, their voices wrapping around him, sickly sweet with promises that reeked of decay. You are perfect for the stories we have yet to tell. As the whispers grew louder, Charlie felt a surge of despair overwhelm him. He pushed through the weight of the darkness, forcing himself to breathe, but with every inhale, he absorbed more of their sorrow. Images flashed before him. Lost children, broken families, lovers torn apart by fate. Each scene bled into the next, a relentless tide of suffering that threatened to drown him. Just as he thought he might break free, the ground beneath his feet trembled violently, cracks splitting through the floor as if the gallery itself was alive, rebelling against the chaos. Suddenly, the walls moaned, shifting like the belly of a beast, and a long shadow elongated across the room, stretching toward him. It felt sentient, a predatory instinct that thrummed in the atmosphere and filled him with primal dread. His heart raced as he realized the shadow was not just a trick of the light. It was a figure rising from the depths of the gallery, a towering silhouette with a gaping maw, darker than night and infinitely deeper. It loomed gracefully, weaving in and out of the shadows, each movement deliberate and intoxicatingly terrifying. Its voice reverberated, low and echoing, spilling secrets of despair and torment. "You've painted your destiny, Charlie," it rumbled. "Now, witness the true price of your art. You will know what it means to suffer for our stories." In that moment, dread washed over him. Charlie felt every story intertwining with his existence, the weight pressing against him, igniting a fire of panic. There was no light, no chance of escape, just his name ringing hollow against the taunting echoes of the gallery. The creature's smile split its face even wider, revealing rows of glimmering teeth like shards of glass, cutting him to the core. "Come, artist," it beckoned, extending a long, thin finger toward him. "You will experience it all. The anguish, the heartache, the darkness that thrives in the human soul. You will feel what it is to be trapped between the canvas and reality." Charlie's knees buckled and he fell to the ground, trembling as the figure drew closer, the atmosphere thickening, pulsing with the anticipation of something unfathomable. He fought against the onslaught of memories being forced upon him, each devastating loss like a blade digging into his heart. In that moment of pure terror, he understood he was on the brink of melding with something ancient and malevolent, a being born of every sorrow that had ever been expressed through art. Yet, amidst the fear, a spark ignited within him, a fierce rebellion against the terrible fate that awaited. "You may take my stories," he screamed, forcing the words through clenched teeth, "but I will not succumb. I will wield this brush and create new tales." With newfound determination, the weight of despair ignited his passion. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the brush with both hands, and faced the shadowy creature. "I will tell our stories on my own terms," he vowed, each word a declaration, rupturing the tension in the air. The gallery roared in response, a tremor rippling through its walls as colors burst alive. Swirling shades spiraled forth, overwhelming the figures in the canvases around him, drowning their cries in a kaleidoscope of vivid hues. Hair raised on his arms, Charlie moved swiftly, brushing the colors across the walls, allowing each stroke to channel the darkness into something beautiful yet painful. With every stroke, he felt their sorrow transforming, reshaping into narratives of resilience, of victories over despair. The gallery responded with a violent shift, trembling with both approval and the threat of punishment. "You dare defy us?" the creature hissed, its smile fading, replaced by a dark snarl. But Charlie pressed forward, unrelenting. "I dare! We all have a voice, and I will not be your puppet." The shadows howled, a cacophony of screams melding into one, hurtling toward him like a storm of despair. But instead of fear, Charlie felt exhilaration. He infused his fears into the canvas, pouring every ounce of agony into art. The walls began to change, betraying the images of suffering that had imprisoned him, shifting their tales into a reflection of hope. The creature lunged, but Charlie was faster. A final stroke, and vibrant light erupted around him, illuminating the darkness. It enveloped him like a warm embrace, dispelling the shadows that had stranded him in the gallery. The tendrils of gloom recoiled, shrieking in fury as the colors transformed into a radiant explosion, consuming the creatures in a torrent of light. With one last, defiant thrust of the brush, he banished the darkness. The gallery trembled, the shadows shrieking, twisting as their very essence was pulled apart. And in that moment, Charlie felt time halt. He stood at the center, heart pounding, bathed in a glow that was both enlightening and blinding. But as the light dimmed, he realized the gallery was not vanquished entirely. The walls hung heavy with unfinished stories, waiting for a new artist to awaken their pain. Charlie's heart raced as he took a step back, the air becoming thick again, littered with echoes of the souls that had come before him, shadows that had woven tales too complex to untangle. In that silence, he felt the weight of their longing, their unanswered cries still lurking just beyond the edges of reality. He was free, but at what cost? The gallery flickered into focus, holding the remnants of its anguish for the next soul daring enough to enter. Charlie caught glimpses, shadows barely holding form, flickering in and out of existence. Charlie, a whisper threaded through the air, chilling him. "You've merely opened the door." He turned, heart racing again as the shadows reemerged, floating in the corners, eagerly waiting for their turn. It was a cycle, one that would never cease. The sounds echoed, reminding him of the pain that lingered just beneath the surface. "Come back," they sang in unison, less a plea and more a command. "You know our stories are not finished." With lingering dread clawing at him, he realized he might be drawn back into their depths, forever a part of their tapestry. The gallery had chosen him, both artist and part of the lost, always seeking but never satisfied. "Create for us," the shadows sang again, their voices soothing yet menacing, promising depths of inspiration. Charlie stepped back, life outside beckoning, but the darkness whispered sweetly, like a lover inviting him in. The choice at that moment was his, and whether to leave or join the everlasting cycle hovered like a specter before him. The door to escape flickered briefly, but shadows began intertwining, promising to wrap him in a haunting embrace that felt almost like home. And as he hesitated, he was acutely aware of the story, still waiting to be told, a dark tale beckoning him back into the gallery filled with both torment and beauty. In that weighty silence, he stood at the edge of his decision, feeling the pull of the profound shadows behind him, waiting to drag him into the depths of never-ending stories, forever echoed in the flickering pain of the gallery he could never truly leave. Charlie stood at the door, uncertainty gripping his chest like a vice. The shadows slithered closer, their forms pulsating with a life of their own, beckoning him with their whispers that seemed to seep into his mind. Each murmur felt like a touch, a cold caress against his skin. He could almost see the faces wreathed in the darkness, hollowed eyes pleading for release, mouths twisted in unimaginable agony. The images flickered, showcasing memories of desolation, as if the gallery itself breathed, alive and hungry. The door creaked ominously, swinging slightly as if inviting him in. A shiver threaded down his spine, compelling him to step back. What lay within could be worse than he imagined. He remembered the creature, its gaping grin and teeth sharp enough to devour hope. Yet within, that maze of fear, curiosity twisted around him, coiling tighter with every passing moment. The only sound was the distant hum of shadows, a throbbing rhythm that matched the thud of his heart. Then, from behind him, a low whisper clawed at the silence. "Join us." The air turned thick with despair, wrapping around him like fog in the dead of night. It was a voice he recognized, a ghostly echo of his own fears. Desperation clawed at his throat. He spun around, searching for the source, but the gallery remained still, a deceptive calm shrouding its chaotic heart. Just as he turned back to the door, a blast of frigid air rushed past him, snuffing the flickering light that had fought to keep the shadows at bay. The shadows came alive then, swirling chaos that spun around him until he was disoriented. Faces emerged, grotesque in their anguish, laughter rising into the air like a sickening melody. Each laugh, a reminder of tragic tales they had spun before him. One moment, it was a child reaching for comfort. The next, a lover, twisted and broken, longing for what was lost. Charlie could feel them wrap around his mind, stories lancing through him like barbed wire, tearing without mercy. In a panic, he stumbled backward, crashing into one of the canvases. It rippled, the paint shifting like a living thing, pulling him in. He felt his body sink, the canvas stretching to accommodate him. Tendrils of darkness wrapping tighter around his limbs, tightening like a vice. "You cannot escape what you've created," the shadows crooned, and he felt their presence in his bones, each pang a reminder of his own shortcomings. The room pulsed, and the paintings around him transformed. Landscapes morphed into nightmarish vistas, where long fingers grasped at the air, searching for something they could never find. In the distance, he could hear their wails, echoing in the recesses of the gallery, building in tempo until it became a haunting opera of despair sung by the damned. Each note dripped with sorrow and longing, wrapping around him, absorbing his will to fight. Suddenly, he was thrust forward, repositioned against the wall of another painting. A grotesque scene of a broken household, the figures trapped in an eternal struggle. Their faces froze in terror, mouths stretched wide, but no sound emerged. Charlie blinked, and in that moment, he was there with them, reliving the torment as the air thickened, charged with their misery. Desperation washed over him like a wave, drowning him in emotions that didn't belong to him. A single child with cracked porcelain skin turned toward him, those empty eyes drilling into him, pleading silently for release. "Help us," it wrote in the air with a trembling finger, drawing out a mist of painful memories. "You created this," he gasped, the realization slicing through the shadows enveloping him. He had painted these lives with each stroke of his brush, trapping every spirit caught in despair and heartache. In a frantic rush, he pulled himself away from the canvas, the chilling presence gnawing at his sanity. Seeking escape, he darted through the gallery, only to find the hallway had transformed into an infinite loop. The walls shifted as if mocking his attempts to flee, enormous hands reaching out, holding him against the vile presence of the shadows. "You're one of us," they chanted, their harmony chilling and dissonant, a mournful song that twisted the very air around him. Every turn he took felt like a spiral deeper into madness. Each painting he passed longer and more grotesque than the last. Painful scenes unfolded before him, a twisted carnival of nightmares, children lost in endless games, laughter turned sinister. He could almost see their small hands reach out for him, small faces shattered by darkness, begging him to join their eternal dance of despair. "No, I won't," he screamed, the echoes swallowed by the yawning abyss surrounding him. But his voice trembled, cracking under the weight of fear. With each desperate stride he took, he could feel the walls closing in, suffocating him in their rich, dark hues of despair. It was a rhythm close to his heartbeat, a pulse that drummed a terrifying crescendo urging him to surrender. As he stumbled forward, the gallery shifted again, and the door flickered into view like a mirage, hazy and wavering. Hope surged within him, but as he approached, the figure of the creature appeared once more, blocking his path, its eyes alight with hungry glee. "Did you think you could leave?" It purred, the words dripped in venom. "You are tied to these souls now. Your stories are theirs, and theirs are yours." With a primal fury, Charlie lunged to the side, trying to skirt around the looming figure. But it was quick, its long limbs snaking through the air, catching his wrist with cruel precision. The pain was sharp and electric, feeding into the shadows that circled them. "You will join them, artist," it hissed, pulling him closer, its breath cold and filled with the stench of decay. "Your fate is sealed among the forgotten." In an instant, Charlie tore himself free, an instinctual surge of adrenaline propelling him onward, his mind racing with the memories of those trapped within the gallery. Each face burned in his mind, and he could hear their cries echoing through the madness. He could no longer pretend they didn't exist. They needed him to share their stories, yet the weight of those expectations felt like chains pulling him down. He stumbled back toward the door, and as he pressed against it, a crack spidered through the surface, light spilling from the fissure. Desperation met determination as he pushed harder, feeling the shadows clawing at him, tearing at his clothes, scratching at his skin, pulling him back. Their voices surged in a cacophony, clamoring for recognition. "Don't leave us," they screamed, overpowering in their anguish. "We cannot endure without you." Yet, in that blinding light, he found a sliver of hope that forged strength within him. "I will not forsake you," he shouted, thrusting his weight against the door. "I will tell your stories." The shadows wailed, a chorus of anguish that shook the very foundations of the gallery as the door creaked open, the light bathing him in its warm embrace. He felt their fury rise to a crescendo, a maelstrom swirling around him as he broke free. Yet, the edges of his vision blurred, and he felt a terror seep into his bones, a chilling realization gripping him. Leaving wouldn't mean escaping their suffering. The moment he crossed the threshold, a jagged scream pierced through him, echoing as if the gallery itself mourned his departure. Charlie stumbled into the world outside, gasping for breath, the thrill of freedom mingling with an unbearable weight burdening his soul. He had escaped the gallery, yet its presence lingered, gnawing within him. He looked back, dread pooling in his stomach as the door sealed shut. Across its surface, faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide in horror, pleading silently for him to return. The realization washed over him, a bitter truth that sank deep. He had left them behind, but they would never leave him. And as he stepped away from the haunting gallery, his heart thundered with a certainty that his battle had just begun. The stories, now etched in his mind, whispered urgently, a dark promise of what was yet to come. He had a duty, an obligation to give voice to those left behind, for in his flight, he could hear their silent screams as they echoed through the very fabric of his reality, a reminder that darkness was not easily forgotten. It lived now within him, waiting, ever patient, for when he would return to finish what he had begun. Charlie stumbled back from the door, breath coming in ragged gasps, each inhalation laden with the acrid scent of fear and regret. The street he stood on felt alive, the shadows stretching like fingers over the cobblestones, beckoning him to return. The flickering streetlights cast eerie shapes, twisting the world into a surreal distortion that played tricks on his mind. Glancing back, he saw the gallery's door still ominously closed, but the sense that he was being watched prickled at the base of his neck, like a cold breath across his skin. He shook off the dread and began to walk, trying to regain some semblance of control. But every footstep echoed in the silence, tainted by the memory of the voices within the gallery. It was as if the very air around him was thickening, the atmosphere pregnant with unspoken words waiting to be freed. He could feel it wrapping around him, a cloak of disquiet that hounded him, each shadow slinking lower, curling and creeping towards him like a predator stalking its prey. Just ahead, a figure appeared beneath a dimly lit lamppost. Its features were indistinguishable, a silhouette cast in dark. Charlie's heart raced. Was it another soul, another victim like him, or something much worse? The figure stood still, swaying slightly as if caught in a gentle breeze that didn't exist. Charlie felt the tug of curiosity against the strong pull of instinct cautioning him to turn away, to run and never look back. His feet, however, betrayed him. Compelled by some unseen force, Charlie approached, every nerve ending alight with fear. As he neared, the figure materialized. It was a woman, her face obscured by a veil of darkness. "Help me," her voice cut through the silence, a shaky whisper that begged for release. He hesitated, the deep pit of his stomach churning. In that moment, a glimpse of thin fingers emerged from the shadows, reaching towards him as if desperate for connection. But as he extended his hand, her form flickered, blurring like a reflection on water before solidifying again. Yet now the veil was gone, and her face emerged. Hollow eyes stared back, devoid of life, yet so filled with sorrow he felt it drown him. The whisper turned chilling. "You belong with us now." The street around him began to warp, the lamppost bending and flickering. The woman's mouth twisted into a ghastly grin, revealing rows of sharpened teeth. Panic surged through him, and he stumbled back, the world spinning. Out of the corner of his eye, shadows began to gather, dancing figures moving toward him from the periphery, slinking out of the darkened alcoves and doorways, their faces both familiar and terrifying. Long, thin arms extended towards him, beckoning him closer, closer, and he could hear their soft rasping, like leaves skittering over asphalt, mixed with soft, bleeding cries. Charlie turned and ran, heart thundering in his chest, pounding like a drumbeat of impending doom. He dashed down the street, each step echoing like a gunshot, the laughter of the shadows chasing him, swirling behind with persistent intention. He could almost feel their breath on his neck, a chill that washed over him like ice water. Around the corner, he stumbled onto a deserted playground, swings creaking in the wind, the scent of rusted metal and damp wood filling the air. But the merry-go-round stood motionless, its surface coated in a thick layer of dust, untouched by time. He forced himself to stop, to catch his breath, but the playground felt wrong, the stillness too heavy. The shadows pooled around him, lingering just outside of direct light, whispering to one another, plotting, pushing against the very fabric of his reality. Unease crawled under his skin like insects. As he stepped forward, the distant echoes of laughter twisted into something dark and sinister, morphing before his ears. The swings began to sway gently, though no wind touched them. Panic seized him. He had to leave, but the playground's atmosphere felt like sticky tar, pulling him deeper into the night. Suddenly, he felt a cold grip on his ankle, sending him crashing to the ground. He looked back to see a child, pale and gaunt, reaching for him with skeletal fingers, that same hollow look in its eyes. "Don't go," it whimpered, yet the voice had an undercurrent of malice, a promise that spoke of shared suffering. "They need you." He scrabbled away, desperate, the boy's grip tightening around his leg until it ripped at the fabric of his jeans, causing him to cry out in confusion and fear. He managed to break free, scrambling to his feet again, but the laughing shadows were all around him now, swirling closer, enveloping him like a creeping tide. "Join us," they sang in dissonance, their voices echoing, pleading, reaching for him with elongated shadows. Charlie could feel his mind fraying at the edges, the memories of the gallery merging with memories of his own darker moments. Faces he had failed, moments of despair, each regret ripping through his substance like a wound. The swings swayed faster now, the laughter rising to a fever pitch, crescendoing into a haunting cacophony that pierced the night air. Eyes everywhere, watched him, flicking into existence in the shadows, all filled with anguish, despair, and hopelessness. In a burst of adrenaline, he sprinted out of the playground, but the world morphed, distorted around him, and for every step he took, the ground seemed to shift beneath him. The cool pavement melted into grass, the streetlights flickered into darkness, and suddenly, he was lost again in a tangled forest thick with fog. Shadows loomed taller in the pale light, filtering through the twisted branches. The forest closed in around him, each sound muffled as if sound itself was terrified to echo here. His heart raced as he moved deeper, branches snagging at his clothes, pulling him back, begging him to abandon hope. And just like that, he saw them. The figures from the gallery, appearing between the trees, cloaked in shadowy limbs that flowed like smoke, faces twisted in anguish. "Why did you leave?" One wept, the voice resonating with pain. "You cannot escape your fate." Charlie staggered back, glancing around wildly, breath caught in his throat. They were here, shades of those he had seen before, bound to him by some unholy connection, hollow like the memories they held. The path behind him vanished, swallowed by the endless dark. A howl pierced the air, cutting through the silence. He felt it in his bones, a howl that echoed with a deep, primal rage. The forest shuddered, branches shaking violently, and he realized he wasn't alone. Something lurked just beyond the trees, a shape darker than the night, eyes burning with a feral hunger, watching, waiting. "Feed us," it growled, a voice that vibrated through the ground beneath him. "You have what we crave." With no option left but to face whatever fate awaited him, Charlie turned towards the figure emerging from the shadowed boughs. Its form twisted in on itself, limbs gangly and unnaturally elongated, mouth unhinged to reveal rows of gleaming teeth, sharp and jagged. A rush of terror swept over him, and in that instant, the gravity of his choices crashed down upon him. The gallery, the shadows, the souls he had failed, they were all one and the same. This creature was both predator and prey, a twisted reflection of the pain he had caused. "I will not bring you more," he screamed, the sound torn from his throat as he took a step back. But the figure merely laughed, a sound that echoed unnaturally in the dark, reverberating like thunder. "You think you can escape what you created? You think it will end here?" The shadows surged forward, wrapping themselves around him, pulling him closer to the ground where tormented cries erupted from the earth itself. Charlie struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter they held him. He felt their breath on his skin, cold and damp, as if the shadows themselves were alive, hungry to devour his very essence. "Join us in our eternal suffering," they whispered, a singular voice collective with anguish. "Never!" With one final surge of strength, he lunged, breaking free from their grasp. He dashed deeper into the forest, the underbrush tearing at his clothes, leaving scratches along the skin. Each heartbeat echoed in his ears, a desperate rhythm urging him to escape. But the path began to twist and turn, shifting unnaturally. With each step he took, the woods morphed, branches folding over him like a cage. He could hear the whispers growing louder behind him, chanting his name in hypnotic unison, a terrifying lullaby meant to ensnare him in their grasp. "Charlie comes back. We're waiting. We know you." The panic shot through him again like a cold knife. The fear of being consumed by despair propelled him forward. He could see a sliver of moonlight up ahead, a clearing that promised sanctuary, a way out of this nightmare. But as he reached the edge of the clearing, the whispers escalated into wailing, a sorrowful tide crashing against him, drowning him in despair. "You cannot escape," they cried in unison, a wretched symphony intertwining with the crackling of the foliage snapping under unseen weight. Heart-pounding, breathless, Charlie emerged into the clearing. There, illuminated beneath the pale light of the moon, stood a mirror, its surface covered in thick dust and grime. As he approached, the shadows lurked just beyond its brilliance, waiting silently, eyes burning with intensity, almost hungrily watching him like a pack anticipating their kill. He hesitated, torn. What lay beyond the glass? Would it reveal his darkest fears, the consequences of his creations? He looked back, seeing the bathed figures emerging from the trees, their faces obscured, but their intentions painfully clear. They wanted him. They craved his presence, his understanding of their sorrow. With trepidation, Charlie reached out toward the mirror, fingers trembling. The surface rippled like water, reflecting not only his own image, but a kaleidoscope of all those he had encountered. The tortured faces from the gallery, the whispers of the forest, and clawing shadows pleading for freedom, for recognition. Each face pressed against the glass, eyes wide and desperate, feeding his own growing despair. He felt his heart lurch as whispers turned to shrieks. "Look," they urged, "begin the cycle anew. Relive our torment. Paint our stories." In that moment, he understood what the figure had meant about his connection to them. It was more than just guilt. It was an obligation. As the moon cast down its spectral glow, Charlie felt the shadows swirl, dive into his very essence, and an eerie calm washed over him. "Join us," they sang, and he stood transfixed, the weight of his choice heavy in the air. With his breath caught in his chest, Charlie stepped across the threshold of the mirror, the shadows swirling around him, pulling him inside. The moment he crossed the boundary, the voices intensified, merging into a symphony of sorrow. He would become part of the gallery now, his stories woven with theirs, a tapestry of darkness eternally intertwined, and his fate sealed among the forgotten. What he had feared would consume him instead embraced him, and as he sank deeper into the link that bound him to those lost, he realized he would never be alone again. The stories would live on. His brush would not falter, for he had become one with the gallery, a haunted artist destined to paint the shadows of the tormented for eternity. And as the mirror rippled behind him, sealing the entrance, the gallery sighed. The shadows danced, rejoicing, celebrating their new arrival, ready to etch his despair into the annals of grisly history forever. Charlie felt the shadows curling around him, enveloping him like an old, familiar coat. But this coat was heavy with the weight of regrets. They wrapped tighter, squeezing the last remnants of fear from his heart. As he stood in the midst of the swirling darkness, whispers began to scatter like seeds in the wind, each word prickling his skin, buzzing in the quiet despair that filled the space around him. "Welcome home," a voice purred, smooth like silk but sharp as glass. It came from a figure who emerged from the swirling blackness, coalescing in a shape before him. The being was neither human nor beast, a grotesque amalgamation of shadows and limbs, eyes flickering like dying stars. Its face was a mask of horror, features shifting like reflections in a disturbed pond. "You'll learn the stories," it continued, tilting its head in mock curiosity. "We all have tales to tell. Yours is just beginning." Charlie felt an icy chill seize him, a primal urge to flee knitting his muscles into knots. He looked around, the gallery's walls closing in, the air thickening with the scent of decay. Faded portraits hung crookedly, vibrant scenes of joy distorted by the creeping darkness that snaked across every surface. These were not mere representations. They were living nightmares, faces trapped in expressions of agony, mouths open in silent screams, pleading for release or understanding. "Listen," the shadow figure insisted, extending a finger that trembled as it pointed to a painting. One of a once sunny meadow, now overrun with rusted barbed wire, the sky brooding in ominous shades of gray. This one speaks of innocence lost. Before Charlie could process what he was seeing, the scene shuddered. Figures began to emerge from the canvas, ethereal and half-formed, stepping into the air around him. Their eyes stared blankly as they came to life with an unsettling grace, moving with broken limbs and jerky motions. He stumbled back, yet the retreat felt futile. The ground beneath began to pulsate like a living entity, pulling him in, roots of sorrow clutching at his feet. The figures surrounded him, their mouths working in twisted shapes as if trying to form words, but all that escaped was a low, haunting groan that reverberated through the cold air, chilling him to the bone. "Help us," one moaned, a face he recognized from a fading memory filled with laughter and light. It was someone he had loved, someone he had lost to the weight of the world, their form now a patchwork of despair. "You need to remember." Then the shadows shifted, and he recognized the child from the playground. Its pale eyes burned with a hollow yearning, the grip on his ankle resurfacing in echoes of pain. "Stay with us," it cried, a shrill edge slicing through the relentless murmurs. "You belong here." Panic surged as Charlie felt the floor twist beneath him, the wooden planks creaking and warping like they were alive. Anguished faces loomed closer, their breath hot and rancid as they pressed in, each one eager for connection, for recognition. He sensed their despair coiling around his thoughts, threading itself into his mind, whispering secrets of their torment. The air crackled, charged with their haunting stories waiting for release. "Make us real again," they chanted in a chorus, their voices rising like a tempest, louder and sharper, drowning out everything. "Paint us. Relive our pain." The walls of the gallery began to pulse, reshaping with each call for retribution. The colors swirled maddeningly like a storm at sea, vibrant hues engulfed by shadow, leaving streaks of black seeping into the ground. A portrait of terror and despair began to form in the center, his hands raised instinctively to shield his eyes from the onslaught of their agony. Yet despite his efforts, he found himself entranced, as if the shadows were drawing him to it, compelling him to create their nightmare anew. Embrace the darkness, urged the figure with the shifting visage, stepping closer, its breath like winter frost. You are one of us now. Compelled, he edged toward the center of the gallery, numbness creeping into his limbs, his mind slipping into a fog. The atmosphere crackled with power, and the urge to paint overwhelmed him. He could feel the brush in his hand, soft and weighty, colors colliding into visions of horror as he willingly plunged into their energies. Each stroke tore through his sanity, creating monsters and entities of despair, ties of darkness weaving around them, smiling faces melting into screams. Where was the joy of creation? His heart raced as he lost himself in frantic gestures, each stroke fueling the very shadows that had drawn him in. They danced around him, fingers brushing his skin, their coldness creeping under his clothes as if they were tracing the outlines of his very soul. Then came the laughter, sudden and violent, a sound that twisted into a cackle. Faces of agony blended with manic delight, their eyes glinting with madness. They were reveling in his descent. The lines of sanity blurred until the gallery walls trembled, seeming to breathe in unity with the chaotic rhythm of his brush. "Join us, Charlie," the shadows sang, voices wrapping around him like silk, smooth yet constricting. "This is where you belong." Images flashed before his eyes, lives shattered by choices he hadn't made or could not undo. Each figure he painted oozed with emotion, sadness, regret, anger, all converging into a maelstrom of sorrow etched into reality. He found himself surrounded, the air heavy with their cries, a maddening tsunami of despair crashing over him, threatening to pull him under. Darkness beckoned, stretching fingers that promised relief, while his heart screamed for escape. Shadows twisted beneath each painted form, reaching for him, longing to reclaim their lost essence. As he stepped back from the canvas, physically shaking, the figure loomed closer, a predatory glint in its mismatched eyes. "You cannot escape what you have created," it breathed, voice layered with mock sympathy. Shadows flared from behind, forming a tangled web of grief around him, each tendril sucking warmth from the air. "You're one of us now. Accept it." Desperation surged like a rising tide, and he staggered back, bumping against a warped canvas. Every inch of him screamed for escape, but the very air was thick with sorrow that clung to him like a second skin. The shadows, now sentient, began humming softly, a sinister melody spiraling around him, pulling him into the depths of shared suffering. "Help us paint our freedom," they cried, their voices merging into a single note of anguish that reverberated through his ribcage, shaking the very marrow. Realization hit him hard. This wasn't just about art. It was about binding their pain to his own, a tether bringing souls into eternal anguish through creation. The urge to plunge deeper into the madness tightened like chains around his heart. He could feel himself falling, spiraling into their stories, interconnected with each stroke he had made. "Let it in, Charlie. It's beautiful here," the figure coaxed, beckoning him toward the center, where the chaos culminated into a whirlpool of despair. And for a moment he faltered. The pain, all pain, coalesced into a single truth. Would joining them free him, give solace to the echoes of his past? Or was it merely another layer of their torment, wrapping him tighter, drawing him into an eternal loop? The choice lay in his trembling hands, and he knew deep down the shadows were waiting for his answer. What would he sacrifice to truly understand the depths of their suffering? What could he give to transform his retribution into creation once more? The painted figures blinked at him, those glistening eyes wide with anticipation. Anxiety twisted in his stomach, gnashing against his mind as he contemplated staring into the abyss. What horrors awaited him if he succumbed to the embrace? With one final breath, he plunged forward, ready to meet the shadows, ready to discover the true essence of despair, a dark promise wrapped in whispers of an eternal existence tied to pain. And in that moment, as darkness swallowed him whole, Charlie knew he had become the very thing he intended to escape. As Charlie crossed into the depths of the swirling shadows, a sense of weightlessness seized him. Yet it was unlike any freedom he had ever known. It felt as if he had stepped through a membrane, the air thick and electric, wrapping around him like a shroud. The whispers grew louder, swirling in a cacophony of cries that vibrated against the inside of his skull, each sound punctuating the weight of his choice. He found himself standing in a vast, dimly lit expanse, a nightmarish landscape merging with the memories he had run from all his life. The ground was made of shifting sand, shimmering with an eerie glow, reflecting pinpricks of light that felt far away, like stars trapped beneath the Earth's surface. Shapes emerged from the shadows, distorted by the flickering glow, each one a silhouette of despair echoing the faces from the canvases he had created. "Welcome," a distorted voice echoed, laced with mockery and regret. You wanted to understand. This is the heart of their stories. This is where they live. Suddenly, figures skittered past him, phantoms of souls twisted by sorrow, their limbs contorted and faces locked in expressions of terror. They were the lost, the forgotten beings who had seeped through the cracks of time and memory. Some wept silently, tears flowing like rivulets of ink pooling on the ground. Others shrieked, their voices combined into a chilling symphony that clawed at his sanity. "Help us," they begged, stretching gaunt hands toward him, fingers as thin as reeds, grasping at the air as if they could hold on to something real. Take our pain, paint it into existence. Trying to look away felt futile. The shadows tugged at the edges of his consciousness, enticing him ever deeper into their realm. He could feel a cold breath on his neck, yet every instinct screamed for him to turn and flee. But fear root-led in his mind, pulling him closer to the figures, their desperation mixing with his own growing unease. Charlie's heart raced, pounding loudly as if trying to break free from his chest. Every beat reverberated with the weight of the choices he had made. He thought of the people he had abandoned, the moments he couldn't save. As he recognized their familiar features among the tortured masses, a lance of guilt pierced through him. How had he been so blind? Then, like a slow avalanche, a memory flickered through his mind. A childhood friend lost to the void of despair. A face now, just a suggestion of what had once been. The darkness around him shimmered with recognition. It was her pain that brought him here. Was this what he wanted? As if sensing the shift within him, the figures twisted, momentarily freezing, their mouths silently forming words that he couldn't quite hear. The atmosphere hummed with tension, and in that charged silence, he caught a glimpse of their true desire to be remembered. No longer just shadows dancing in the corners of his mind. They craved to burst forth into reality with all their anguish etched painfully into art. "Join us, Charlie," the distorted voice whispered again, close enough now that he could feel the chill seep through his clothes. "Become the vessel. Let us transform your pain into beauty." Just as the words settled into his mind, the shadows lunged. They swirled around him, intertwining, merging into a singular entity that pulled him down into their depths. His body felt heavy, as if immersed in freezing water, dragging him under an ocean of despair. Past the swirling forms, a formidable sense of terror enveloped him, weighing him down while promising freedom in return. They began to whisper secrets, tales of sorrow and betrayal writhing in the air. Lost lovers, broken families, car accidents that stole lives in an instant. The stories poured into him, infecting his thoughts, igniting a hunger for creation he had never experienced before. He could see them all now, could feel their stories mingling with his. Suddenly, laughter broke through the anguish, a frantic, bubbling sound echoing around him. Faces warped into grotesque grins, eyes flashing with a gleeful madness that danced on the precipice of insanity. "You see," one vaunted, its voice dripping with sickly sweetness. "It's beautiful. Join us in the creation of your own nightmare." As the shadows pulled closer, they tugged at the very essence of who he was. fingers tracing the outline of his mind, unearthing the darkest corners he had locked away. He could feel their cold caress, sending electric shocks through his neurons, igniting a fire of creativity that intermingled with madness. The lines between his reality and theirs blurred, and he stumbled as he faced this new, chaotic form of existence. Suddenly, he was thrust into a whirlwind of images, each more horrifying than the last. He was forced to relive the painful moments of his life. The day his mother was taken away, wild laughter of friends morphing into their final cries as darkness enveloped them. Each event surged through him like a tidal wave, crashing against his resolve, drenching him in their terrors, as if he were the canvas they were painting upon. "What is your pain?" The shadows intoned, voices merging into an echoing chant. "What is it that you want to forget?" Like droplets soaking into the ground, memories began to saturate his thoughts, each one carving deeper into his psyche. He saw the faces of the people he had hurt, the choices that had led him to this moment of reckoning. The missed calls, the conversations left unfinished. They came alive under the weight of his creativity, taking shape in front of him, twisting into strange forms that writhed and screamed, begging for peace. "Help us," the voices crescendoed, their allure now suffocating. "Accept us. Embrace what you've created." He could feel it now, the power coursing through him, rising like a storm. Adrenaline and fear grappled in his chest, urging him forward into a relentless tide of pain and sorrow stretching endlessly before him. The torment was intoxicating, each crime mixing with his own breath, filling his lungs until he thought he might choke. Yet deep inside, amid the chaos, a whisper of defiance flickered. This wasn't the answer. This wasn't his redemption. Charlie closed his eyes, desperate to escape the flood of anguish that was pulling him under. But the figures closed in, their eyes electric with anticipation, urging him to join in their twisted waltz of creation. "Let us in," they chorused, a single entity now, their shadows flickering like candle flames. "Let us show you the way." With all his might, he struggled against the tide, fighting the urge to give in. Memories collided in his mind like colliding waves, and he could feel the solidity of his will slipping away. The ground rumbled beneath him, and he felt the oppressive heat of the shadows, their darkness swirling like a storm, suffocating him in a cocoon of despair. And then, with a final surge, the shadows grew impatient. They reached for him with claws of darkness, dragging him down, until he could barely breathe. The weight of regret and sorrow pinned him, wrapping around his throat like a noose. He gasped, and in that moment, the fabric of his reality began to tear. Blinding light burst from the edges of his vision, and he was thrown into a harsh clarity. The darkness around him began to splinter, fracturing into a million pieces, and he saw them, the faces of the lost, staring back at him with a desperate hunger. It was a primal hunger that reached deep into his soul, clawing away at his defenses until he felt raw and exposed. "Let go," they cried, their voices rising in a vengeful choir, swirling into a tempest of rage. "Let us consume you. Embrace the darkness." His heart thundered, racing in response to the panic swirling inside him. He could feel reality crumbling, fractals of light and shadow shifting against the canvas of his existence. Charlie felt the weight of their stories heavy on his chest, and for the first time, it dawned on him. The pain they carried was no longer theirs alone. It had become undeniably his too. He stood at the precipice, teetering between acceptance and rejection, knowing that whatever choice he made would seal his fate. It was terrifying, feeling so utterly swept away, but needed to reclaim his life. That flicker of defiance ignited again. "I can't," he screamed into the void, his voice echoing against the walls of their unnerving reality. "I won't. You're not my pain to bear." The shadowy forms stilled momentarily, surprise rippling through the mass of darkness. They recoiled, confusion flickering in their hollow eyes, as though he'd struck a chord deep within their essence. But the hunger was still there, a raw, gnawing hunger clawing at his heart. Suddenly, in the momentary silence, Charlie saw a flicker of possibility on the edge of his consciousness. What if he could take their pain, but not for himself? What if he could channel it, shape it, give it a new form? His heart raced with the revelation. The urge to create was still there, fine-tuned by despair, but now tempered with the desire to illuminate their suffering instead of surrendering to it. What if creation could offer them a semblance of peace? Spurred by a growing resolve, Charlie focused on the swirling shadows, shaping his will into something tangible. I can't save you, but I can help you. He lifted his hand, shaking but resolute. I will give you life through my art. I will teach the world your stories. The figures hesitated, but then surged forward, eyes locked on him, and their urgency returned, washed over by new waves of fear and hope. In a whirlpool of adrenaline, he began to take his place among them, reaching deep into the essence of their screams. The air shimmered around him as visions ignited, colors bursting forth like fireflies in a desolate night. They coalesced, shaping the memories that burned brighter than the abyss that sought to swallow him whole. The shadows twisted with surprise, their desires momentarily shifting. What they longed for was beginning to take form. Charlie felt the pulse of creativity flowing through him, intensifying as he embraced their agony. Images unfurled before him, and he began to paint their torment, infusing it with vivid hues that contrasted sharply with the heavy darkness. "Release," he shouted, pouring his heart into every stroke. The shadows lashed out in excitement, morphing around him as he wove there. Stories into a tapestry of light and texture, love and loss, a dance of pain transformed into remembrance rather than despair. Every brush of light illuminated the faces of those lost among the dark, their agony evolving into swirls of vibrant color breaking free from the chains of sadness. The shadows, once so menacing, now swelled around him with hope, shifting in rhythm with the flood of newfound purpose. They began to reflect the colors of the world he was creating, releasing their hauntings into the ether. With each stroke, the very fabric of their anguish began to unravel, giving rise to beauty born through suffering. The darkness around him didn't dissipate, but it shifted, becoming a canvas for something higher, a tool through which their stories could be told. His heart raced with excitement and terror as light and shadow danced together, revealing the balance of life and death he was slowly discovering within himself. "Remember this," he whispered, breathless and overwhelmed. "Let it remind you of why you were lost, but also of the light that can emerge from that pain." And within that moment, as the shadows whispered words of gratitude, the gallery around him shifted. Walls metamorphosed into expansive canvases, creating a sanctuary where their stories could live, breathe, and resonate with those willing to listen. As colors bloomed like flowers breaking through cracked earth, Charlie felt alive for the first time, full of purpose as he embraced the gift he had been given, a purpose born from sorrow that would bridge the gap between darkness and light. But rattled deep inside was an unsettling notion. While this transformation felt true, the shadows still lurked, whispering promises that lingered just beyond the edges of clarity. Charlie understood that while he could share their stories, the darkness would always be there, coiling around the corners of his mind, waiting for the moment weakness would slip through the cracks. "Let this be a new beginning," he murmured to himself, resolve firming in his chest, but tinged with dread. For he knew the shadows were patient, ever watchful, ready to strike when he least expected it. Still, in that magnificent gallery of wrongs made right, Charlie would continue to shape, paint, and create, turning pain into beauty, all while dancing with darkness on the very edge of sanity. As Charlie stood within the vibrant gallery of his creation, the warmth of bright colors swirling around him, a shiver crawled up his spine. Just at the edge of his awareness, shadows flickered like candlelight, threatening to engulf the luminous beauty he had crafted. It was beautiful and horrendous at the same time, a balance threatening to tip at any moment. Then came the whispers, a chorus that coiled around him like tendrils of smoke, creeping into his thoughts. They murmured his name, echoing in the cavernous space, soft and sweet, yet dripping with malice. Every brushstroke he made seemed to draw the shadows closer, their presence invading the very air he breathed. "Join us," they sighed, voices slithering into his mind. "You cannot escape what you've created. We are a part of you now." He could feel their coldness, an unsettling chill slicing through the vibrant warmth surrounding him. The colors began to flutter, darkening at the edges, as if sensing the lurking dread beneath the surface. Despite his efforts to embrace the shadows and transform their stories into light, he felt their hunger, a relentless urge drawing him back into despair. Suddenly, the gallery walls began to pulse, expanding and contracting like a living, breathing organism. The canvases warped, the images shifting and twisting as though they were alive, depicting not just the sorrow of the lost souls, but also the fear that clawed at Charlie's own heart. Faces emerged from the colors, hollow-eyed and mouthless, their expressions frozen in silent screams, reaching out to him as though begging for release. "What do you want?" Charlie shouted, his voice trembling in the cavernous space. "We want to show you," they replied in a unified hiss, their voices wrapping around him like choking vines. "The truth behind your art and the darkness you've failed to confront." The colors of the paintings darkened, swirling into a storm of despair that loomed above him like a tempest about to break. Suddenly, the air grew thick and heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Charlie gasped, straining against the pressure surrounding him. The once vibrant scenery began to shift into ghastly depictions of his past mistakes. Shadows danced like puppets on the canvases, recounting moments he wished to forget. The sound of glass shattering as he lashed out in anger, the crumpled forms of friends left behind in the wake of his reckless decisions. Each vivid image struck him like a blade, piercing through his resolve and dragging him to the edge of a chasm filled with regret. And then, in a horrifying twist, the shadows morphed again, this time expanding into a grotesque figure that towered above him. A faceless entity clad in swirling shadows, emanating a suffocating dread. The figure raised a hand, and with a zealous spell, the gallery's light drained away, plunging Charlie into a deep, unsettling darkness. "Fear is your friend, Charlie," it whispered, the voice echoing deep in his bones. "Embrace it. Let it fuel your creations." The darkness clung to him, thick and viscous, as he felt himself being pulled into the core of his choices, spiraling down into the void where his nightmares lurked. The entity took a step closer, and the air grew frigid, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into his skin. From the depths, anguished cries erupted, resonating from the shadowy form. They were the voices of those he had wronged, spiraling around him in a cacophony of despair. Every choice he had made loomed large in the darkness, a heavy weight he could no longer ignore. "You can't create art without sacrifice," the figure said, its hollow voice reverberating throughout the space. "Give in, Charlie. Let us take your pain and share it. Let the world feel what you've buried." A surge of panic chased the chill away momentarily, replaced by a feverish adrenaline. Charlie squeezed his eyes shut, desperate to block the relentless voices, but the images flooded into his mind. His mother's despair, friends drifting away, frail friendships crumbling under his own weight. With every moment spent in this gallery, the shadows thickened around him, feeding off his agony, distorting his fears into nightmarish forms. With every gasp for air, the shadows shrieked louder, a siren call echoing in a cruel symphony. Desperation clawed at his throat. He couldn't succumb to this darkness, not now. "Get away from me," he shouted, trying to push the shadows back. But they pressed closer, wrapping around him like ghostly bandages. The entity loomed closer, its features indistinguishable in the oppressive gloom. "You think you can escape what you are? What you've done? There's no hiding from your own art." Words turned to howls as a wave of images crashed over him. Shapes spiraled into grotesque forms, like memories twisted and torn, each one a reminder of what lay at the heart of his torment. Dread swallowed him whole as he fell into a vortex of horror, his reality fracturing. Each wretched scream melded into the next, forming a symphony of his regrets, driving him to his knees. The shadows grinned. He could feel their glee, their satisfaction as they witnessed his unraveling. Time lost meaning as he was enveloped in grief and terror, a never-ending spiral of his darkest moments forcing him to confront the truth he had run from. He was not just the artist anymore. He was the canvas, stripped and bare before the all-consuming darkness, every flaw and imperfection on display. In that moment, he understood. The shadows were not merely emissaries of pain, but reflections of his own guilt and sorrow, longing for acknowledgement. With a sudden spark of defiance, Charlie raised his head, breaking through the suffocating hold of despair. "I will not be your puppet," he roared, anger igniting within him, pushing back against the storm that sought to claim him. But even then, a sliver of doubt crept in. Was he truly free, or just dancing on the strings that held him? The shadows hesitated, swirling around him as they whispered, "You cannot deny us. We are your truth." In a desperate attempt to reclaim control, he struck the nearest canvas, the vivid colors bleeding and melding into grotesque shapes of his past. An ugly scream ripped from his throat as his anger manifested in strokes of rich, dark paint. The shadows recoiled, the brilliance of their former grip shattering in response to his raw emotion. But as he painted, he felt a chilling realization sinking in. Not all creations would bring sanctuary. In fact, new horrors were brewing in the depths of his solitude, shapes he had yet to confront lurking just below the surface. The walls began to close in again, echoing with laughter. The painful mirth of the shadows now wrapped around the truth he feared the most, that art is never pure and misery feeds creation. The entity loomed larger, an amorphous threat woven from his very essence, snarling at him as if to remind him of the precarious balance he had created. He was both the artist and the art, and what he unleashed could render him as monstrous as the shadows themselves. A whimper broke from his lips, but it was drowned in the surge of insanity that leaped the room into chaos. Colors began to swirl wildly again, portraying futures filled with horrors he had yet to fathom. Then, as if summoned by his fear, a new darkness crept into the scene, creeping along the edges of his vision with patient persistence. It lingered there, shifting like smoke, seducing him with promises of liberation from his anguish. The whispers grew louder, melding into a hypnotic chant that reverberated in his ears and resonated with a melody of despair. "Join us, Charlie. Let go of your fears. Let us erase your pain. Together we can create the ultimate truth." As the shadows danced, their grotesque forms shifted, drawing nearer, each shift revealing glimpses of his own horrid creations, the images of pain, suffering, and despair he had tried to transform. Charlie could feel the darkness wrapping tighter around his throat, squeezing and constricting, drowning him in doubt. As he gasped for breath, he knew he was teetering on the edge of a precipice where the line between creativity and chaos blurred. He would either embrace the darkness within or become just another figment of its consuming hunger. "You're nothing without us," the shadows shrieked, thrumming with an anger that shook the very foundation of his sanctuary. The pull of their suffocating grip grew stronger, the tourniquet of despair tightening until he felt like screaming. Yet behind the veil of fear lay a flicker of hope. Perhaps he could harness this turbulence. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could wield it rather than be consumed. He clenched his fists, heart racing as he found a weaker spot within the shadows, a vulnerability hidden beneath layers of rage and sorrow. If only he could find the right colors, the right strokes, he might spin the darkness into something beautiful once again. But the shadows would not allow such an escape without a fight. They were hungry, restless, the tendrils of their insatiable desires thrumming at the edges of his build-up emotions. With every attempt to reclaim his vision, to mold them into something recognizable, they lashed out in a painful dance of foreboding. Pain floated through the air, whipping at Charlie's cheeks like wind-whipped branches, sharp and slicing. Each gust was a reminder of his failures and the horrors he had yet to face. Through it all, a haunting sense of foreboding loomed, a cloudy precipice that warned him of the dangers that lay in the depths of his creations. Shadows flickered at the corners of his vision, whispering tales of those lost souls who had surrendered to despair. "Join us. You cannot overcome the weight of your sins, Charlie." As the air thickened with their discontent, Charlie felt the anxious dread settle into his bones, anchoring him as the walls began to splinter. Each pulse of light and darkness painted a dire picture of the curse he bore, a narrative woven in pain, regret, and shattered dreams. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed, and darkness exploded behind him, splintering the gallery into shards of shadowy doubt. He turned, heart racing, curiosity taking hold. The world was fracturing, revealing the void that lay beyond. It was a horrifying chasm, yawning wide, clawing at him with invisible hands. And as wisps of tortured memories emerged from the depths, he realized it wasn't just his past he was confronted with. It was those he had lost, standing at the edge of the abyss, waiting for him to join them. Their faces twisted, unrecognizable, mouths moving in silent screams as they gazed at him with haunting familiarity. "What have you done?" they seemed to cry, their voices lost to the dark winds howling through the chasm. A surge of panic raced through him. He stepped back, the world thrumming with chaos, the edges of reality fraying as he felt their pain seep into him. Would he too be lost, an echo among the shadows? "You have the power, Charlie." A voice broke through the turmoil, familiar yet distorted, slithering through the air as he turned to see the shadow of his mother. Her expression twisted in sorrow, yet there was an urging desire, a beckoning that drew him in. Use it, transform your nightmares, or join them. And in that breathless moment, the true horror dawned on him. Amidst the chaos, he could feel the weight of the decision pressing down, a choice that could unleash a darkness greater than he had ever known. Would he embrace the limitless darkness, the seductive pull of the shadows, forever binding him to painful memories? Or would he rise against it, channeling this malevolence into something more profound, a testament crafted from both fear and courage? Charlie steeled himself, fingers trembling against the edge of the canvas, as the shadows began to swirl like a storm around him. He could see the storm brewing, sense the battle raging within the depths of his own creation. Each decision weighed heavily as he faced the sacrifice that lay before him. The potential redemption hidden just out of reach, intertwined with the monstrous darkness craving release. "I choose," he breathed, the words hanging in the chilly air, a sliver of determination igniting within him. A voice, his own, rose above the tempest, wielding colors pulled from the shadows, harnessing the chaos as he prepared to face the twisted truth that lay beneath the surface. Would he be able to confront the darkness without succumbing to its apocalyptic pull? Would his art give life or death to what he had created? The shadows laughed, their cacophony echoing like thunder, mocking his challenge, their glee pulsating with a resonance that sent shivers down his spine. And as he plunged deeper into this wicked dance, a new realization settled within him. The darkest part of himself was not just an enemy, but the fuel he needed to ignite the flames of creation, no longer a prisoner of the shadows hovering just beyond his reach. They twisted and coiled like serpents, their whispers growing louder, the air thickening with tension. With each stroke of his brush, he poured his essence onto the canvas, the thick paint almost alive beneath his fingers. Dark tendrils knotted together, forming grotesque forms that writhed with a life of their own. Each shape brought a surge of memories crashing in. A child's laugh, a scream echoing through hallways, the sound of breaking glass, giving birth to a chaotic orchestra of his past. As he painted, shadows began to unfurl from the canvas, escaping the confines of his art, creeping over the walls like dark vines, hungry for freedom. He was no longer just creating, he was unraveling something far more sinister. The air turned electric, charged with the dread of what was forming around him. He could feel a presence behind him, its icy breath grazing the nape of his neck, drawing him deeper into the labyrinth of his fears. Charlie spun around, the unfinished canvas looming ominously behind him. In the dim light, he saw faces emerge from the darkness, swirling and contorting into expressions of anguish, eyes wide with terror. Memories he thought he'd buried began to flash before him like a haunting slideshow, each flicker igniting the shadows that sought to drag him back into the abyss. He stumbled, breathless, as the figures stepped from the darkness before him, their mouths moving in silent agony, a cold understanding shared in their gaze. "You invited us here, Charlie," a voice moaned from the shadows. The one figure that stood apart, its features cloaked in obscurity, yet somehow familiar. It stepped closer, and the air thickened with a sense of dread. "We are the whispers you try to silence, the screams you shove in the corners of your mind." His heart pounded as the shadows closed in, suffocating him with despair. The room began to twist, walls bending and shifting, reflecting his darkest creations, a cacophony of laughter and weeping vibrating through his bones. The paint created swirling patterns, coalescing into tornado-like funnels, spiraling deeper into a chasm of despair. Each rotation revealed another memory, another loss, drumming against the fragile remnants of his sanity. The shadows danced with glee around him, their excitement palpable, feeding off his fear. The figures moved forward, their tears glistening like dew, each drop a reminder of the moments he wished to forget. They tugged at his frayed threads of reality, each yearning to pull him into the swirling darkness that beckoned with open arms. Charlie stumbled backward into a memory, a flash of his childhood home, twisted and decayed. Windows shattered, walls dripping with dark, viscous stains, the scent of rot filling the air. The front door creaked open, revealing a long corridor, lined with doors that pulsed as if breathing, each one a prison holding his nightmares captive. He could hear whispers beyond those walls, calling his name, an unsettling melody he never wanted to hear again. "Open the door, Charlie." The sinister figures beckoned, their shadows stretching like claws towards him. "Let us in. Let us play." As he hesitated, the world cracked like fragile glass, splintering around him. With a sudden rush, the doors flew open one by one, revealing grotesque, countless scenes of his failures, each detail more disturbing than the last. In one room, he saw himself as a child, standing alone, tears streaming down his cheeks as an unseen force loomed over him, always just out of focus. In another, a version of himself was hunched over a desk, frantically painting, as the room filled with the echoing laughter of unseen children, twisted and forever taunting. His heart sank further into despair. Shadows slithered from the openings, circling him like a predator closing in on its prey. He could feel their cold fingers grasping at his consciousness, threatening to pull him into the rooms of torment he thought he had forgotten. The air became heavy with suffocation as the figures began to merge into one, a monstrous amalgamation of faces and voices, blurring the line between the past and present. "We just want you to remember," they whispered, their voices knotting around him like chains, dragging him towards the open doors. "You owe us that much." Charlie could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on him, the shadows creeping closer, their breath wrapping around him like a vice. The paint on the canvas bubbled and warped, serving as a mirror reflecting his own growing madness. He struggled against the tide, pushing back against the suffocating shadows that sought to drown him in despair. Just as he felt himself begin to slip away, he grasped the brush tighter, channeling the anguish into each stroke. With deliberate slashes of vibrant color, he began to craft his reality, pulling from the very depths of the fear that engulfed him. "I transform you into something more," he shouted, pouring his frustration into every curve and line, breathing life into the grotesque figures that had come to haunt him. The shadows hissed, their anger swirling into a dark storm that roared around him, the walls trembling in response to his will. The room dissolved into a tempest of color, light battling darkness as the figures twisted and shrieked, their forms flickering between monstrous and beautiful. Charlie painted with urgency, pouring his soul into the canvas, a reflection of horror intertwined with fleeting hope. Suddenly, the twisted faces solidified, contorted in agony, but slowly transitioning into a semblance of peace. As each expert stroke of the brush brought them closer to life, Charlie realized he was not just battling the shadows. He was breathing life back into the memories that plagued him. Each stroke became a liberation, unraveling the dark memories while allowing their truths to emerge with skin softening into something that could be born. Yet as the figures began to take shape, a deeper darkness resided within them, lingering like an unforgiving shadow. Their smiles, though blissful, held a tinge of malice. Charlie could sense their hunger, an insatiable urge that pulsed like a heartbeat. Even in the light he fought to create, he understood they would still want something from him. A price yet to be paid, a sacrifice hidden beyond the borders of despair. "You think you can create us, Charlie? You think you can tame this pain?" They murmured, their voices dripping with honeyed mockery. The world around him distorted again, slipping deeper into chaos as a rift opened beneath the canvas, a black abyss mirroring every ounce of dread he had ever felt. In that moment, he was torn between two realities, the light and the dark swirling at his feet, daring him to choose. The shadows began to claw at his ankles, dragging him closer to a fate he could feel was both seductive and terrible. As he teetered at the edge, Charlie understood the chilling truth. He was not just the creator, but also the creation, entwined in a dance of nightmares and artistry, clinging to the hope that he could transform the horror within. But the shadows were persistent, reaching for him with icy fingers, whispering promises of power and freedom wrapped in tendrils of despair. "Submit, and we will show you true art, true destruction." Each word dripped with menace, weaving a perilous web around him, compelling him to leap into the void, forsaking everything he'd ever held dear. Charlie's resolve began to wane, the temptation creeping, and threatening to swallow him whole. Yet as he glanced back at the canvas, surreal and vivid, he suddenly felt a flicker of rebellion ignite within, his own heart still flickering stubbornly against the tide. The battle within raged, light wrestling with the dark, each second stretching into eternity as he faced the reality he created, the monsters now fully formed, yearning for his surrender. With one final breath, he grasped the brush and pressed it against the canvas one more time, a reckless surge of determination driving him forward. "I will not bow to this darkness." His voice echoed through the room like a battle cry, resonating against the howling shadows. With a sweeping motion, he began to paint anew, a spiral of color, light bursting forth as it collided with the murky darkness. Each stroke carved deeper into the shadows, forcing them back, battling their insatiable hunger with the radiant force of creation. A tempest of feelings swirled around him as he fought against the grasping claws, refusing to yield to their sinister whispers. As the shadows writhed in agony, he dared to face his demons, pushing them into the light, unveiling the truth within each figure. His heart pounded, fury weaving into every brushstroke, rage igniting the colors as their forms began to take shape. The dance of malice turned into a battle for his very soul, a crisis of creativity and horror existing in tandem. And as the dark storm raged on, Charlie realized that this was not just a fight against his past. It was a confrontation with himself, two sides of a coin spinning in the air, both desperately vying for control as shadows swam and clawed through the realms of his imagination. He forged ahead, lost in the tempest, determined to seize his fate from the very jaws of darkness, refusing to let them win, knowing that with every heartbeat, he was painting his truth into existence. Yet, even as he fought, an unsettling thought lingered in the back of his mind. What if the truth he birthed only multiplied the shadow's appetite? What if in his effort to reclaim his lost pieces, he was merely feeding their insatiable hunger? Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted, the abyss beneath him threatening to swallow him whole. He stumbled back, the world shaking violently as the shadows rose, twisting and merging together in a final, terrifying surge. A kaleidoscope of echoes reverberated, crashing through his senses, pulling him down into a world where dreams and nightmares coalesced into one. At the brink of annihilation, he paused, breathless and trembling. Could he find the strength within to withstand this final onslaught? A shiver of fear sparked within him, and he braced himself, ready to confront whatever horrors awaited just beyond the precipice. In that moment of stillness, the shadows recoiled, sensing the weight of his determination. The once impending storm hesitated, swirling in confusion, a flicker of uncertainty illuminating the edges of their darkness. Charlie felt it, a soft ripple of power coursing through him, igniting a flame of reckless courage, a surge of chaotic clarity pushing him forward. The canvas seemed to pulse in sync with his heartbeat, a beacon amid the chaos, revealing the path he was destined to take. "I choose to forge ahead," he declared, his voice steady and unwavering, the paint shimmering bright against the darkened room. With each brush of his hand, he transformed horror into clarity, anger into twisted beauty, and despair into vibrant living art. Shadows shrieked, the figures writhing and convulsing, but for every spirit he placed on the canvas, he reclaimed a part of himself lost to the darkness. The boundaries of reality shattered. Colors erupted into streams of vibrant chaos as he painted himself free. The darkness roared, furious and ravenous, yet he stood resolute, the shadows no longer creeping shyly at the edges of his mind. They lashed out, chaotic and furious, but he met their onslaught with fierce strokes, turning their menacing shapes into bursts of light breaking through the void. So, he plunged beneath the surface of his mind, the tumultuous waves crashing upon him, transforming the fear into a riot of color. With every ounce of rage, with every heartbeat, he infused the canvas with a mixed chorus of his memories, the misgivings, the anguish, and the fragility of his soul. In that cacophony of creation, he faced the monstrous shadow of his guilt, the chains that held him captive, demanding his surrender. "You are mine," it cried, its voice screeching through the air like nails on a chalkboard. Yet as he painted, the truth of his being began to dissolve the chains' grip upon him, the horror morphing into an ethereal space, the figures lifting from the canvas, momentarily free, swirling around him in a desperate embrace, waiting for their release. Charlie felt their agony mingle with his own, the shades of his past longing for acknowledgement as flowers of suffering blossomed in the swirling darkness. "Remember us," they urged, echoing through the hall of his mind, their cries urging him to express the true heart of his art. Imagery flickered in and out, hauntingly familiar as he painted, each facet illuminating the struggle between light and dark in a tempest of energy. But a question plagued him. What price must he pay for this newfound freedom? The shadows vibrated with anger, twisting into unrecognizable shapes, howling beneath the onslaught of his vision, desperate to reclaim the fragments of his soul he so fervently fought to release. The air thickened as they swelled, the tumult rising around him, a vortex of chaotic energy swirling like a black hole, threatening to engulf the very essence of the abyss. Each breath felt heavy with dread, the room around him losing solidity as the shadows converged, swirling and writhing with malevolence. Charlie stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the canvas, the pulse of his heart echoing in a rhythm too fast. The once vibrant colors began to bleed together, a grotesque mix of hues, distorting into visions of loss and anguish. He saw faces from his past, friends long gone, memories twisted into monstrous shapes, their eyes wide with terror as they reached out to him, their mouths forming silent screams. "Why did you abandon us?" a voice shrieked, a chorus of agony intertwining, slithering through the cracks of his mind. He recoiled, not just from the grotesque display, but from the realization that each stroke he painted summoned their essence back, feeding the very nightmares he sought to escape. The shadows began to stretch and twist, forming ghostly hands that clawed at the edges of reality, pulling him toward the gaping maw of dark. With every flick of the brush, he felt the weight of his regrets heavy in the air, the room dimming as if the sunlight itself recoiled in horror. The whispers grew louder, a sinister incantation weaving a tapestry of dread, urging him to surrender to the chaos. Each word dripped with venom, curling around his limbs like serpents, tightening as he faced the tumult. "You can never escape us," they hissed, the cold breath of the darkness icy against his neck, sending shivers coursing through him. He turned, seeking refuge in the colors, but they bled into shadows, swirling with a life of their own. Figures emerged from the darkness, grotesque and misshapen, their features shifting between familiar and unknown, a macabre homage to loss and fear. As he painted desperately, frantically, the shadows coalesced into a towering figure, a grotesque silhouette draped in sorrow, its eyes burning red with rage. It loomed over him, the very embodiment of his regrets, whispering enticements too sweet and sinister. "Join us, Charlie. This is the true art, the unity of despair and creation." Panic surged, and he swung the brush again, desperately attempting to create something beautiful. But the paint turned thick and clotted, refused that drip from the canvas as if rejecting his fervent desire. Every stroke he made felt like a retreat, a slow unraveling, the canvas almost mocking his attempts to reclaim himself. The figure's laugh echoed hollowly, a sound that resonated in his bones, chilling and familiar. "You think you can erase us? We are part of you, just as you are part of this canvas." As the words sank into his mind, the painted figures began to writhe, twisting into monstrous forms, their smiles stretching wider, baring teeth that dripped with malice. Charlie felt his pulse quicken, almost blurring his vision as the shadows crept closer, their tendrils reaching for him, pulling him down into their depths. Trapped within a grotesque gallery of his making, he could hear the scrape of claws against the walls, racing toward him, a chorus of nightmares echoing, reflecting his insecurities. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness, leaving him alone but for the suffocating presence of the looming shadows. He stumbled blind, fingers tracing the edge of the canvas in panic. "No, not like this," he cried, voice barely a whisper against the enveloping silence. The shadows recoiled momentarily, then surged, a dark wave crashing over him. He thought he could hear his own name, a wretched cry drowning in the cacophony of despair. "Charlie, come play." They beckoned, voices sticky with sickly sweetness, as if children lost in a game of hide and seek where the rules had twisted into something sinister. As he fell to the ground, the paint splattered across his hands, pulsing with liquid darkness, his skin burning where it touched. He felt it seeping into his veins, each drop pulling him deeper into the shadows, where time twisted and coiled. Images shifted before him, memories playing out, their laughter like chimes, transforming into spine-chilling wails. Faces flickered into his vision, friends he once cherished, morphing into shadows of those he had abandoned, their eyes filled with pure, palpable hate as they converged on the canvas. "You promised you'd remember us," they accused, their voices rising into a shrill crescendo that rattled his very core. The figures writhed on the canvas now, alive with fury, each brushstroke an echo of the past. The temperature dropped sharply, causing his breath to shimmer before him in ghostly patterns. Charlie felt the very essence of his fear materialize, heavy and oppressive. He scrambled to his feet, heart racing, trying to fight the tide of malevolence, but the shadows flowed like liquid around him, pulling him down to their level. He grasped the brush like a lifeline, flailing against the darkness closing in, but the paint resisted his will, thickening with every stroke as if mocking his attempts at escape. "Stop fighting, Charlie. The art is within you. You just have to embrace us fully," they teased, laughter reverberating through the air, a chorus of taunting giggles echoing through the room. His mind raced, Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to wake from this nightmare. But the more he fought, the tighter the grip of their invisible fingers became, drawing him closer to their insatiable hunger. The canvas pulsated, a living entity devouring shadows and light alike, merging into one chaotic whole under his trembling hand. The ground cracked beneath him, fissures slithering through the room, and with each moment the darkness reached further into his core, a vivid reminder of the pain he had tried to escape. "Join us," the shadows hissed, their voices intertwining like venomous vines. Each whisper slithered through his mind like poison, planting seeds of doubt and despair. "You can't run from us." Overwhelmed, Charlie faltered, the brush slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor, shattering the tenuous silence. In that moment, he realized his only escape lay not in fighting, but in acceptance. Surrendering to the shadows felt like letting go of a lifeline. But was it possible they offered freedom rather than entrapment? The darkness surged forward, a tidal wave threatening to crash over him completely. But instead of yielding, he reached down. Grasping the brush once more, he turned toward the canvas. "Fine, if you wish to be part of my art, then I will show you what true creation looks like." Each word resonated with a finality, an undeniable spark of defiance igniting within him. With renewed vigor, he began to paint anew, transforming the darkness rather than erasing it. The figures screamed in outrage, twisting and contorting, but he infused them with color, revealing their inherent beauty and pain. "You are not just shadows. You are memories." With every stroke, he breathed life into his darkest thoughts, illuminating the canvas with their distorted forms. "Embrace your pain," he shouted, rage and sorrow merging into a blinding light that radiated through the room. As he painted, the abyss trembled, a cacophony of wails echoing in protest. But their voices faded into the background, and for the first time, the shadows glittered with hints of color. In that moment of chaos and creation, the boundaries between light and dark began to blur, the world around him spinning into a whirlpool of revelation, affirming the truth hidden within. The shadows, finally released from the grip of anger, began to shift, a dance of light swirling through. Charlie's heart raced as he painted the release of their agony, marveling at the transformation unfolding before him. No longer just victims of darkness, they became vibrant reflections of his own journey. Each grotesque figure now a testament to a life touched by both despair and beauty. As he completed the final stroke, the shadows erupted into a vibrant kaleidoscope, momentarily flooding the room with brilliant light, erasing the darkness that sought to consume him. He felt their anger dissipate, replaced by something softer, something that whispered of understanding and acceptance. With the final stroke met with silence, no longer a cacophony, but a symphony, Charlie dared to hope that he had not only painted his fears, but also redeemed them in a gleaming embrace, woven into the very fabric of his being. Yet as the colors settled into place and a profound stillness enveloped him, a deep sense of unease lingered in the air. What he had created felt alive, a sentient reflection of his most guarded fears still hanging precariously, as though the shadows had merely retreated, biding their time until they could once more unleash their chaos. With every crack in the silence, he felt the dark still lurking, waiting, just beyond the veil, whispering promises of power, vengeance, and unresolved fury. In the quiet that followed, each heartbeat thudded against the canvas. The painted figures pulsed, features shifting into expressions of horror and longing, tears dripping as they reached out with ghostly hands, desperate to reclaim their lost essence. The air thickened, a weight pressing down on him, and Charlie felt as if he was being watched, not by the figures on the canvas, but by something far older, lurking in the corners of the room. Something that thrived in the darkness, feeding off the very fear he had tried to confront. An icy breeze swept through, skirting along the floor and brushing past his ankles, prompting the hair on the back of his neck to stand on end. A faint giggle echoed softly, a child's laugh twisting with malice, sending chills crawling up his spine. Turning slowly, his eyes scanned the dim corners of the studio, searching for the source. Shadows morphed on the walls, elongated fingers creeping toward him, trails of darkness flaring as if trying to grasp at his reality. "Charlie," the voice called again, this time closer, insistent, dripping with playful menace. "Come and play with us?" He swallowed hard, the chill wrapping around him like a shroud, pressing against his skin, stifling breath. Fists clenched, he took a step back but stumbled over a paint can, the metallic clang echoing harshly in the quiet. The studio warbled as the shadows danced, ecstatic over his stumble, celebrating his fear. Light flickered and sputtered, an old bulb struggling against the encroaching dark. One moment illuminated, the next swallowed whole. Dread gripped him as he inched toward the door, the weight of unseen eyes feeling heavier upon his shoulders. But just as he reached for the handle, the canvas rippled violently, colors swirling into a vortex that threatened to pull him in. "We won't let you leave," the figures screeched, their mouths stretching wider, a grotesque parody of longing and hunger. Their laughter morphed into a cacophony of despair, filling the air with sorrow and rage. The painted colors dripped like tears, pooling around his feet and creeping toward him, dark and viscous. As they touched his skin, a searing pain shot through him, memories flooding his mind, moments of loss, betrayal, and regret, each linked to a name that clawed at his consciousness. Struggling to escape, he jerked back, slipping in the slick paint. It clung to him, a shroud of despair, pulling him deeper as shadows coiled around his legs, tightening with every desperate move. "You can't run, Charlie. You're part of this now." The coldness intensified, wrapping around his throat, choking him with despair. He gasped, his eyes darting to the canvas, where forms began to emerge, a swarm of phantoms swirling, each face a fragment of his past, twisted with anger and sorrow. Their features blurred, yet he could feel their pain echoing in his own heart, each shriek resonating through his bones. Suddenly, the studio grew silent, an oppressive stillness hanging heavy in the air. Time stretched, a taut thread ready to snap, and all at once, a deafening crash shattered the silence. The door flung open, creaking on its hinges as if some invisible force had pushed it aside, revealing the pitch-black hallway beyond. Charlie recoiled in terror, unsure of what awaited him. "Join us, Charlie," echoed in his mind, wrapping around his thoughts, threatening to pull him into the abyss he'd tried to evade. Heart racing, he stumbled back into the studio as the shadows began to swirl again, coalescing into a massive form, reminiscent of the dark figure from before. It loomed larger, billowing with all the pain and dread he had ever felt, and its eyes glowed red with a wicked intensity. "You think you can escape the truth?" it sneered, voice a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "You painted us, we are you, and you are us." With desperate determination, Charlie clutched the brush tightly, his only weapon against the approaching despair. "No, you will not take me," he screamed, frustration boiling over, the air crackling with his anger. But as the shadows surged forward, flickering like flames, he realized how futile his resistance was. They moved with purpose, their grasp tightening, cold fingers brushing against his skin, pulling at the thin veil separating his reality from theirs. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the clamor, a face he'd given up on long ago. A figure emerged from the swirling mass, drifting forward, eyes filled with longing and sorrow. Charlie's heart dropped as he recognized her, the lost friend, the memory he'd forsaken in his desperate journey. "Charlie, help us," she cried, reaching for him, her form shimmering with desperation. "We're trapped here because of you. You have to finish it." The shadows twisted around her, gnashing their teeth as if to silence her, their rage palpable. Time stilled, waiting for his next move. Every breath he took a battle against the rising fear. "Finish it," her voice echoed, filled with urgency, but Charlie's thoughts raced, uncertainty clawing at his consciousness. The fear of losing himself to the darkness battled against his longing to save her. The shadows pressed closer, compressing the space around him like a vice. His heart hammered in his chest as he fought to remember the last brushstroke, the moment of truth entangled between creation and obliteration. He was losing grip, the shadows growing stronger, their hungry whispers taunting him about his failings and fears. With newfound determination, he threw himself toward the canvas, the brush igniting in his hand. "You will not win," he declared, and with each stroke, he began to paint their anguish, transforming their rage into something breathtaking yet haunting. The figures danced, wailing, shifting form again, merging with hues of sorrow and hope, light and dark swirling together in a storm of emotion. But with each move, the malevolence intensified. The painted spirits shrieked louder, their faces morphing in agony, reaching out, grasping for him. The malevolent force lurked, watching, waiting for a moment of weakness to snatch him away, to drag him into the inferno of despair. As the brush glided over the canvas, the shadows around him swirled chaotically, their whispers rising to a maniacal crescendo. "Join us, Charlie. Feel the power." It echoed, each word a siren's call, the promise of power wrapping around him like a vice. In that moment, he felt it, the seductive pull of darkness, the lure of giving in. As the final stroke was laid, the colors burst forth, exploding with an otherworldly light that illuminated the studio. And yet, a nagging fear curled in his gut. Had he truly conquered them, or simply given form to their rage? The shadows shrieked, their wails morphing into a dissonant melody that reverberated through the confined space. They roiled against the painted surface, desperate to break free, clawing at the edges of reality. Charlie stepped back, breathless, watching in horror as the painted realm isolated itself, standing stark against the reality of his studio. The night outside grew darker, as if the world, too, had turned against him, shunning the light he had released. Then, just as he thought it was over, a hand shot out from the depths of the canvas, a grotesque, painted hand reaching through the surface, grasping for him. Heart racing, Charlie's senses flared with panic. "You thought you could defeat us?" whispered the voice of darkness, coated in venomous glee. It spilled from the mouth of the figure, writhing in an agonizing twist of color and form. "You are ours now, Charlie." He staggered back, realizing the shadows would never relent, their power intertwined with his very soul. The brush slipped from his fingers, clattering against the paint-slick floor, losing the only barrier he'd created. In that devastating moment, he felt the grip of despair wrap around his heart. The room shuddered as the figures began to crawl through the canvas, spilling forth from their painted prison, their eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. They twisted in grotesque limbo, melding into living horrors. Charlie could only stare, trapped in a web of his own making, the laughter of the lost ringing like a death knell in his ears, echoing his failures. Desperation clawed at his throat as he realized the truth. He had accidentally unleashed a torrent of their pain with no way to confine it again. The darkness enveloped him, their cold fingers creeping beneath his skin, whispering sweet promises of despair while he trembled on the verge of relinquishing his last remnants of hope. But just outside the reach of total despair, a flicker of rebellion ignited within him. He was not just an artist. He was a creator, a conjurer of beauty and darkness alike. With shaking resolve, he stepped forward, determined to rewrite the narrative. "I will not let you take me," he shouted, voice surging with defiance, the empty studio vibrating with his conviction. Each moment of hesitation melted away, leaving only the burning desire to reclaim his reality. With each step, he plunged toward the painted figures, defiance blazing in his chest. He was ready to face whatever terrors lingered in the shadows, ready to battle for his very soul. Charlie charged forward, adrenaline coursing through his veins, and the shadows shrieked in fury, their cries echoing through the studio like the sound of shattering glass. The air thickened, heavy with malevolence as the painted figures writhed on the canvas, their oozing shapes stretching and twisting in grotesque fashion. Each color surged and coiled, a serpent of despair threatening to strike. As he moved closer, the figures began to claw their way out of the surface, hands grasping at the edges, fingers thin and elongated like they were formed from strands of darkness itself. The paint dripped like blood, pooling on the floor and reflecting distorted images of his own terrified face. He could feel the cold tendrils of their energy slithering around his ankles, binding him to the spot, pulling him ever closer to the enchanted surface he had once thought of as just a canvas. "You are ours, Charlie," one of the figures whispered, its voice a sickly sweet croon that slithered into his ears, burrowing deep into his mind. The noise of the room faded into a chilling silence, the shadows wriggling like maggots around him. They twitched and churned, each one a whisper of the dreadful memories Charlie had tried so hard to forget. He felt them pierce into him, the sharpness of regret slicing through his defenses, memories replacing thoughts as images of betrayal and grief crashed into him like waves. "Join us," they hissed, their voices echoing in unison, a symphony of despair that drummed against his skull. Those he had loved, those he had lost were wrapped in the shadows, their expressions twisted from the pain he had caused. He could see their faces, lost friends, family members, worn and hollow, their eyes black pits of anguish. Charlie fought against the tendrils of darkness. Determined to escape their grasp, he pulled back, feeling something give way within him, a fissure that threatened to consume him. In that moment of desperation, he lunged toward the largest shadow, fists clenched, aiming for the heart of the thrumming mass. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned the brush, now ignited with newfound energy. Every flick and swirl of paint became a weapon, radiating warmth that fought against the encroaching cold. He began to paint furiously, strokes laced with his feelings, binding the chaos around him into a semblance of form. "No, stop!" The shadows growled, lashing out, their slender fingers reaching for him as if trying to snuff out the light he was creating. They twisted and thrashed in the air, desperate to maintain control. Yet he pushed on, each stroke a testament to his fight against despair. The figures moaned, their voices now filled with a hollow anger, and the shadows began to morph, responding to his defiance. They surged forward, intertwining, merging into a monstrous visage that towered over him. A swirling mass of agony, shaped into something horrifying yet enchanting. Its eyes blazed like twin suns, glaring down at Charlie, radiating pain and malice. "You dare to challenge us?" it thundered, the voice reverberating off the walls, cracking the paint and shuddering the very floor beneath him. The room shook violently, dust cascading from the ceiling, and the air crackled with energy as the figure loomed closer. Charlie had never felt such fear before. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and flee, but he could not. He had to conquer the demons he had summoned. He pressed the brush harder against the canvas, pain fueling his strokes, each movement releasing fragments of his dark past, binding them to color and form. The swirling figure roiled above him, the shadows writhing in agony as shards of his regret took shape around them. They begged and howled, sounds that pierced through the halls. Even the walls began to bleed darkness, dripping paint like the tears of souls lost long ago. Suddenly, the cacophony of voices rose around him. The whispers became maddening, surrounding him, drowning him in their despair. Charlie barely heard the message they carried. It was a chant, a beckoning that spiraled through the air. "You cannot escape your own making. You are the master of your nightmares." Panic surged in his chest as the reality of their words sank in. He had summoned this horror into existence. He had painted their pain into being. The shadows were not just entities of darkness. They were manifestations of his sorrow, each one a fracture in his soul, every hue a stain on his heart. Charlie faltered. The painted forms surged, crashing against him like a tidal wave of energy. The floor trembled beneath him, and he could feel the reverberation of their despair pulsing through the ground. The painted canvas, once his sanctuary, now felt like a monstrous prison, the walls inching closer, suffocating his resolve with each breath he took. He could hear the soft sobs of his friends, chasing echoes of laughter turned sour. Their eyes, once bright, now downturned, glimmering with a sorrow that echoed his own. He staggered back, throat tight with grief, and the shadows coiled around him, pulsing with dark glee, their hunger insatiable. "Embrace it, Charlie. Let us in," they called, voices blending into a maddening symphony that rattled in his bones, promising mercy and surrender. With every heartbeat, the specters of his past faded into a pitch-black abyss, threatening to swallow his light whole. In a final surge of clarity, Charlie realized what he had to do. Through his fear, he found the strength of his presence, deep within the swirling storm of regret, amid the cacophony of their haunting. "You will not control me," he shouted into the clawing shadows, forcing his voice through the oppressive mist. "You will not take me." The air crackled with his resolve as he focused on the brush, igniting it with the last of his willpower. He could summon the memories of joy, love, the moments that had once filled him with hope. He painted fiercely, colors blossoming like flowers breaking through soil, fighting against the darkness that sought to crush him. Radiant yellows and blues burst forth, shimmering through the canvas, competing against the gloom, an explosion of vibrant light that battled back the oppressive black. The shadows recoiled, the monstrous figure above him shrieking with rage, twisting in futile attempts to swallow the light. Flashes of agony shot through him as he felt their pain push against his every brushstroke, clawing for dominance. But Charlie pressed on, using each feeling of despair to craft something new, weaving a tapestry of resilience and strength that pushed back against the encroaching dark. The room trembled violently, paint splattering against the walls, colors swirling in a chaotic dance that filled the space with an electric tension. "This is my art, my life," Charlie roared, each word echoing power through the studio, reverberating off the walls as the shadows twisted and twisted, their howls mingling with the colors bursting into new life. With one final stroke, the air split, light exploding outward, blinding him. He could feel the shadows recoiling, breaking apart as they screamed their final chorus of despair. In that moment, he understood. The light he had painted was not just an escape. It was a counterbalance to the darkness, a way to reclaim his soul from the grip of despair. The figures began to dissolve, their forms crumbling into dust, scattering into the air like ash. A violent gust swept through the studio, carrying away the remnants of darkness, leaving only the vibrant hues of color swirling around him, a whirlwind dancing with his renewed spirit. Charlie breathed deeply, feeling the burden lift from his chest as sunlight spilled into the room, flooding the space with warmth. The shadows were gone, banished into the corners of his mind, but their whispers lingered, soft, eerie reminders of the darkness that could return. Yet in that moment, he stood rooted to the ground, staring at the canvas, now alive with color and light, representing his battle, his pain, and in the depths of the colors, he felt something new, a sense of hope. He realized this was just the beginning. In his heart, a flicker of understanding ignited. The journey ahead would be long, painful, but he had learned how to fight. The memory of their hauntings would come and go, the shadows lingering in the twilight. But he could choose to create anew, to fill the canvas of his life with colors, light, and the beauty of perseverance. And he vowed, before the remnants of darkness could stir, that he would never let fear control him again. With every deliberate stroke moving forward, Charlie embraced the fear within him, ready to paint a future of his making. His art, a reflection of both light and dark, always shining brighter. He stood alone in the cascading light, yet something felt off. The shadows had fled, but a chill lingered in the air, curling around him like a forgotten whisper. The colors on the canvas shimmered, vibrant and alive, but in the back of his mind, he could feel the shadows still watching, waiting. The studio, once a sanctuary of creativity, now pulsed with an unsettling energy that made his hair stand on end. As he took a step closer to the painting, he noticed something dark writhing beneath the vibrant surface. It was as if the colors were struggling to contain the darkness that lay beneath. The brilliance of reds, yellows, and blues twisted into shapes that writhed and crawled like worms, unsettling and grotesque. The layers of paint began to ebb and flow, churning as if possessed by their own frantic thoughts. It was as if the haunting figures he had just banished were clawing their way back into reality, furious for being trapped in this chaotic mess. He staggered back, heart racing as he felt a presence surge behind him. The sensation was electric, an icy breath that curled around his neck. Whispers danced at the edge of his hearing, soft and insistent, like the coiling mist that licked at his skin, pulling him back toward the canvas. The walls of the studio seemed to lean in, shadows thickening to midnight as the familiar outlines of the figures began to emerge again. But this time, they were different. They had faces, twisted, tortured, and distorted. Expressionless mouths opened in silent screams that filled the air with a suffocating tension. Charlie, a voice lilted from the shadows, a voice he recognized yet dreaded. It was a strange, mocking sing-song, echoing memories he cherished in horrid new light. Did you think you could escape us? Did you think your art would save you? The air thickened with their presence, filling him with an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the very walls were alive, breathing in sync with the sinister figures emerging from the void. Panic clawed at him. He turned back to the painting, desperate to reclaim his creation that had spiraled out of control. But as he stared, horror began to set in. The figures were no longer mere memories. They were manifestations of his guilt, reflections of every mistake and every time he had turned away from those he had loved. They surged from the canvas in waves, too many to count, their eyes empty but filled with an unnerving hunger. They were here to take him back, to drag him into the depths of their regret. "Join us," the figures called, reaching out with slender, clawed fingers that stretched and distorted, a twisted gesture of allure and dread. The air crackled as if reality itself began to fracture, suggesting that he was no longer both artist and subject, but merely prey, ensnared within the web of his own making. The studio was transforming, the light receding as more and more shadows crept into reality, threatening to engulf him completely. He stumbled away, heart pounding as he realized the whispers had grown louder, a cacophony of voices blending into a terrifying symphony. Voices that pleaded, accused, and laughed, each tone a dagger that aimed for his heart. The very space around him felt as if it were collapsing inward, walls painted with longing and fear closing in with suffocating pressure. His fingers twitched nervously for the brush, yet every moment spent apart from it felt like a descent into the abyss. "You cannot outrun your truth, Charlie," echoed one of the figures, its face shifting to resemble the people he once cherished, twisting into nightmares that sucked the air from his lungs. He could feel their icy grip creeping over his skin, an unrelenting chill that seeped into his bones, the haunting sorrow of each face merging into a grotesque mask of agony he had tried so hard to forget. The studio felt infinitely larger, yet somehow smaller, disorienting in its layout. The painted walls shifted, bending and warping as if trying to pull him in, drawing him into a world where dark and light mingled in a dance of torment. Each step he took mirrored the echoes of laughter and weeping that entwined in chaotic harmony, mocking his plight while filling him with desperate hope. There was nowhere to hide from these shadows of his past. They slipped through the cracks of his mind, insidious whispers growing louder, creating a tempest of despair. Suddenly, a surge of warmth pulsed from the painting, reminding him of his resolve, but twisting it into something darker, something alive. He could feel the echoes of his past clashing with the colors swirling before his eyes, an insatiable appetite for life teeming with the lingering grasp of his regret. Breath hitching, he reached out to the canvas, drawing from the resonant warmth while containing the onslaught of shadows, their howls rising in pitch and fury. Each figure snarled, clawing for his spirit, hungry for his drawn-out pain to fuel their vengeance. In that moment, a shift occurred. Charlie realized he no longer needed to fight alone. He could weave the vibrancy of his hope into the dark, patchwork together a more intricate web of experience. With steel resolve, he dipped the brush in every hue, reclaiming the colors of his life, blending the brightness against the void. It was raw. It was powerful. As he painted, the magnificence of light clashed violently against the shadows, creating an explosion that rocked the room. Vivid illumination danced in, intertwined with the encroaching darkness, battling for dominion over his creation. The shadows screamed now, shrieking in frustration, clawing at the canvas in futility as the light regained its footing, shimmering fiercely in defiance. The colors glowed brighter, illuminating Charlie's spirit as he willed back the memories he could wear like armor instead of shackles. "You will not win," he bellowed, breath burning in his lungs, unleashing the energy that coursed through him, transforming his fear into a furious tempest of light. The figures faltered, their dark forms flickering against the brilliance like moths caught in flame, and for a moment, he felt victorious. But then the shadows began to split, revealing more than he had anticipated. More faces, more voices. Some of them looked familiar. Others were strangers cloaked in ghostly dread. They swirled around him, pulling him deeper into their collective sorrow. Shadows enveloped him, inching closer and closer until he felt their breath on his neck, icy fingers trailing like a caress that turned to a vice grip. Charlie was swallowed into their abyss, becoming lost in the void, each voice blending together in an unsettling drone that reverberated through him like a fading echo. You thought you could escape? You thought you could change? You cannot run from your shadow, Charlie. The echoes pierced his consciousness, sapping his determination with every word, ensnaring him within an illusion of comfort, claiming their hold on him as if they had become his very essence. And then it happened. A chill swept through the space, and time unraveled in an unsettling dance. The light flickered, shadows lashed out, and he saw a vision of himself, 1 foot in the darkness, 1 foot in the light, forever trapped on the edge of oblivion. The canvases around him twisted, warped, the vibrant colors bleeding into murky shades of despair. He felt threads of fear weaving tightly around his heart as he fell deeper into a chasm of hopelessness, devoid of hope or redemption. Charlie's breath caught, heart racing wildly as he grasped for the brush, feeling it slip through his fingers again and again, each grasp a mirror to his past mistakes. With every passing moment, the laughter of the shadows echoed louder, tightening around him, drowning out the steady beat of his heart. He lost sight of himself, the edges of his reality blurring as his spirit fragmented and drifted into the fathomless depths. But in that freezing moment, when every whisper sent shivers down his spine, one thought pierced through, the indomitable spark of resilience nestled in the very core of his being. This was his creation, his life, and he refused to be consumed by the darkness any longer. Gathering his last ounce of will, he forced his vision back to the painting, and drawing on the memories of love and joy, he painted with fervor, infusing every stroke with the colors of hope, each brush a lifeline to pull him back. "You are not my master," he roared defiantly, the words erupting from a place deep within him, resonating with a power that shook the very foundations of the room. The shadows flinched, retreating momentarily, unsure of the light that surged forth once more. Each stroke became a declaration of intent, vibrant colors clashing against the oppressive darkness, swirling into forms that spoke of remembrance, of rebirth. "I will free you," he shouted, determination flooding his veins as the shadows skittered back, twisting and writhing in confusion. He couldn't see the faces of his loved ones waver before him, their silhouettes mingling in the colors that grew brighter, threatening to consume the darkness. Together they danced, a beautiful marriage of light and shadow, and he felt his heart elevate as the very essence of his being poured onto the canvas, becoming something transcendent that pushed against the void. With each stroke, the remnants of sorrow that haunted him began to transform, reshaping into whispers of hope and love, a vibrant tapestry that wrapped around him like a protective cocoon. As he poured every ounce of his being into the artwork, a whirlwind of emotion erupted from within, a cathartic surge that banished dread. The resonance of his pain, braided with love, cascaded over the still echoes of darkness, charging through the studio like a storm unleashed. In that final moment, as the vibrant colors swirled like a tempest, he understood the truth. It wasn't about erasing the darkness. It was about making space for light, accepting the shadows as part of his existence. With one final stroke, Charlie pushed every fragment of his spirit into the painting, creating light so blinding that it consumed the shadows, rendering them nothing but a memory, a reminder of where he had come from, not an anchor for where he would go. With a shattering crash, reality pulsed and spun, the studio erupting into brilliant light. The walls melted away as the shadows dissolved, leaving behind an open expanse where colors flowed freely like a river. He felt the weight lifted off his chest, every fear and doubt swept away like leaves in the wind. The faces of those he loved lingered, their eyes now filled with warmth instead of betrayal, their smiles radiant as the storm quieted into a soft murmur. Charlie smiled through tears, staring at the canvas that now pulsed with energy, each brushstroke alive and vibrant, telling a story of resilience, loss, and ultimately, rebirth. The darkness would remain a part of him, but he would never let it control his art or his life again. He had learned to embrace the shadows, weaving them together with threads of light that illuminated the way forward, each stroke a testament to the beauty that could emerge from despair. As he stepped back from the canvas, the world began to shimmer and shift. The studio transformed, the shadows melted away, replaced by a serenity he had long thought lost. The ache in his heart began to dissolve, replaced by a gentle warmth that reminded him of love and hope. The shadows may have been banished, but their lessons would remain. He could navigate life with an understanding of his truth, art forever intertwined with the essence of himself, a living story that continued to unfold. Charlie knew that from this point on, he would wield his brush like a sword, ready to create masterpieces infused with both light and darkness, embracing the duality of existence. The echoes of whispers transformed from threats into companions that guided him to understand his place in the world, that even from the darkest depths, beauty could arise, redefining what it meant to be alive. He stepped into the light, ready for whatever came next, his heart undesiring darkness, but understanding its place, painting a future true to himself, embracing the vivid dance of life.